Bedtime, kiddos. Everyone to the bunk area for some shut-eye. The kids made their way to their beds as another day in the kindergarten came to an end. Masha cast a glance at Dex as he walked to his bunk. Rebecca quieted her mind for a good night's exploration. Dex and Dunstan nodded to each other as they climbed beneath the sheets, and Gerald just stared at a slowly pulsing string as it stretched across the ground. The lights dimmed as everyone settled in for the night, and slowly the kindergarten quieted. But despite the children's quieting for another night of sleep, elsewhere, people were doing anything but settling down. Elsewhere, there was still business to be done, and evils to accomplish before the day was out. Cutter looked up from a strenuous workout as the overhead announcements rang out before turning back to his weights. 45, 46, 47, 48. Cutter liked to maintain his physique. When you worked with kids that could explode your brain from the inside, you had to come to terms with that however you could. Cutter liked to do so by pushing his body to its absolute limits and making himself as imposing as possible. He learned a long time ago that just because a kid could crush you into paste with an errant thought or make you cluck like a chicken by invading your brain didn't mean that they would. Most of them were still just kids. They could be intimidated, they could be scared, and they could be charmed by an adult who seemed to be impressed by them. Cutter had put hands on some of them before, and it was amazing how they folded when someone with absolute authority finally stepped in. 49, 50. He put the bar back in the rack with only a little noise as he sat up and wiped sweat from his brow. Cutter considered this to be his vacation and his retirement after serving 2 tours in Iraq. Cutter had served with guys who had joined the Marines because they wanted their school paid for, or because they wanted action and adventure with none of the getting shot at, and hadn't really appreciated being in an active war zone. They were wannabes, fake warriors, and when the bullets started flying, they suddenly wanted to be anywhere but there. Cutter had a leg up on most of them. Cutter had been in Desert Storm when he was fresh out of boot camp, and done some things for his country over there that would have maybe been considered distasteful. He had discovered that he liked hurting people when he was younger, and he had taken it into the military with him. If it hadn't been for some hard-nosed general pushing him out after an incident in Kandahar, Cutter would probably still be overseas, shooting people for one organization or another. Instead, the black side had decided that he could be of use to them, and he'd been here for the last 20 years doing just that. Cutter was a survivor, but he was getting old, too. He knew he didn't have many more years of this, his usual formidability, left in him, and he intended to extend it as far as he could. He moved on to another machine and continued his workout. Cutter knew guys he had gone to high school with who were using walkers and pissing in bags right now. That wasn't going to be him. He'd put a bullet in his head before he let anyone see that kind of weakness in him. 1, 2, 3, 4. The weights went up and down as the cords on his arms bulged and slackened. Cutter could go like this for hours, and after the week he'd had, he just might. Nothing put him to sleep like a bottle of Jack and a good workout, and he intended to push it to the limit tonight. By the time he fell into his rack, he wanted to be good and thoroughly tired. Dr. Hammarskjöld was finishing up a report and rubbing at the bridge of his nose. He still hadn't heard back from the woman that Dunstan claimed was his mother. He was beginning to wonder if he would hear back from her in time. He wanted to help Dunstan, maybe get him some closure, or give him a quiet place to land after all this was over. But he knew that happy endings weren't the norm for these kids. He also knew that Security Chief Ridley was still keeping an eye on him. Every time he passed by one of those camera housings, it felt like eyes boring into him, and it made him flinch just a little bit every time. He didn't know why he was so nervous about being watched. So what if they were watching him? He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't hurting anyone or committing any treason. He was simply doing something he felt was right. He looked at a tab next to the one that he was typing in and clicked over to look at an email that he was drafting. He had drafted about 100 emails like it, but he had never sent one of them. Working for the government had its advantages, and finding his daughter's email account had certainly been one of them. She was an adult. She would want to hear from him. But every time he finished an email and read it over, it always sounded pathetic and weak to his own ears. Why would she want to talk to him? He had abandoned them. He had left them to whatever fate might have in store. He was a failure, at least in their eyes he would be. He couldn't expect anything of them. The same thing they had always expected from him. He hovered his cursor over it to delete the email, and then clicked over to the report instead before it could find its way into the garbage bin, as so many had. Coward, he told himself. Maybe he was a coward, but he didn't know what he would do if she rejected him or didn't want to speak to him at all. People had been rejecting him for most of his life, and every time it was a little harder to see the good in humanity. They hated him because he was short and because he was deformed. They didn't hate him because he was essentially practicing eugenics for the government. They didn't hate him because he was a monster who hurt children for his country. They simply took one look at his outsides and decided they didn't want anything to do with him. It was unfair, but so was life. He pinched the bridge of his nose again and went back to typing. He needed to finish up this report for today's lessons so he could get some sleep and do it all again tomorrow. Perhaps there would be an email from Janice tomorrow. Perhaps he would finally muster up the courage to send an email to his daughter tomorrow, and maybe he would even hear back from her. That was the good thing about tomorrow. You could always delude yourself into thinking it was full of possibilities. Miss Cashmere had nearly been asleep when someone knocked on the door of her small room. She grimaced and checked the time. It was about 10 o'clock, and most people knew that she liked to be asleep by 9:30. She'd brushed her teeth, gotten into her pajamas, and taken her sleep aid. And now she was getting ready to drift off to sleep when someone had decided to come and bother her. She thought she knew who it was. It was usually the same person, and she decided it was time to have a talk with them about boundaries. She got up and turned on the nightlight on her bedside table before heading to the door, and opened it to find one of the IT guys standing there with a cheap bottle of wine and a cheesy grin stretched across his face. His name was Gavin, and she had an on-again, off-again thing with him. He was nice enough, not bad to look at, and a generous lover, but he could be tiresome as well. He reminded her of the Leonard character from The Big Bang Theory. Nice and sweet, but a little too clingy and naive for her taste. He was also young enough to be one of her kids. Jensen was 5 years younger than him, but already seemed more mature. That wasn't a deal breaker for her. He was over 18 and had pursued her, but it was still a little creepy when she stopped to think about it sometimes. "Hey there," he said as the door came open, holding the wine like a game show host showing off his wares. Cook was getting ready to throw out some wine, but it's perfectly in date, and I see no reason that we shouldn't enjoy it. Would you like to share a glass with me? It's still pretty early. Sorry, Gavin. I've already taken my sleep aid, and I think I'm going to turn in. I've got a busy day tomorrow, and I've got to keep my head around little Masha. unless I want it to explode." Gavin smiled, but he had a funny look on his face. He looked as if his disappointment was twined with something like anger. Not real anger. Gavin was too much of a wuss for anything hotter than petulance, but he might have at least come all the way to disappointment. He'd clearly thought that going out of his way to get something nice for her would earn him some time in her bed, and now that wasn't happening, and he felt frustrated and petulant, like the child that he was. "Seems like you haven't had any time for me since you started your new class. Maybe you've outgrown me." Miss Cashmere tried not to roll her eyes. She had outgrown him before she met him. Gavin was sweet, but she had a husband at home waiting for her, as well as a couple of kids in high school. It was a private high school, tuition paid for by generous contributions from the black side and the federal government, and both of her children were far more emotionally mature than the man standing in her doorway. The kids sure did wish that Mama could be home more often. So did her husband, for that matter, but a little separation was nice sometimes. It let her truly be herself and maybe find something new and strange before going home to her loving husband. "This is a little different than teaching blue band, sweetie. This kid could be dangerous if she's not instructed just right. It's like training dogs. You have to keep your wits about you or you're going to get bit." "I wouldn't mind a little nibble sometime," Gavin said, trying to be cute, but barely making it to annoying. "Maybe another time. I'm already starting to get drowsy. If you catch me this weekend, maybe I'll have some time for you." He was starting to become tiresome, and she wanted him to take a hint and go away. "Okay," he said, perking up a little as he realized he might still have a chance. "Maybe I'll catch you on Saturday. They're watching a basketball game in the teacher's lounge, so I don't think anybody'll notice if the two of us slip off." She smiled and tried not to let her skin crawl too much at the prospect. "Until then," she said, as she leaned forward to kiss him on the cheek before closing and locking her door firmly. She was going to have to break things off with him soon. Gavin was getting clingy, and he just wasn't emotionally mature enough to have a friends with benefits kind of relationship. He had spoken to her more than once about having a life together outside this place, but she had always reminded him that there was no life for them outside of here. She would return to her family, and he would return to his apartment or wherever he stayed when he wasn't here. They could only really be together here, and despite how many times she had said as much, she didn't think he was ever going to get it. She was asleep about 5 minutes later, her dreams filled with Gavin's clumsy hands and honeyed words as he lay her down for the night. Security Chief Ridley saw the door close and smiled as Gavin slunk off with his wine. On another monitor, he watched Cutter as he lifted weights, as if it would give him the special powers that so many of his students possessed. On another screen, he watched a couple of other IT guys as they sat in the cafeteria and drank whiskey from plastic cups. Gavin wandered in, and they offered to share the bottle of wine. Soon he was laughing and passing it around as he drank some of their whiskey and forgot about his failures of a moment before. Not much escaped the notice of Security Chief Ridley. He often spent his evenings sitting behind the screen in his office and keeping an eye on everyone within the facility. He could even see the little doctor as he sat in his quarters and obsessed over a report that he was writing. There weren't a lot of places that they didn't have cameras, and the places they didn't have them were more about decorum than anything. Ridley had a few cameras in some of those places, but nobody but him knew about that. He'd made it a rule not to have them in the children's bathrooms, however. Something like that seemed wrong, even to him, and he was a man who regularly tortured children for the good of his nation. Something about watching the little kids as they did their business, however, seemed a step too far. There had to be a line drawn somewhere, or what was to separate him from the animals and the politicians. Ridley was a man who hoarded secrets like a spider hoards flies. He sat in his web and watched the comings and goings of everyone below and gathered up his flies for the time when he might need them. You never knew when someone was going to get the bright idea to try for his job, and Ridley wanted to be able to dangle something juicy and scandalous over them so they would shut up and fall back in line. It was the thing that had ultimately doomed his predecessor, and the secrets were how he had gotten to the center of the web, something he felt was well-deserved. The coffee came up to his mouth as he took a sip, his eyes never leaving the monitors. Security Chief Ridley knew that something was afoot, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it before it threatened everything he had worked for. He wasn't going to lose his web to a bunch of snot-nosed kids or a bunch of greedy adults. When it came down to it, Ridley would rather burn the place down himself and rebuild from the ashes than let them light the fire. If it were all to fall apart, then let it crumble by his hand, rather than theirs. You know, you don't have to come with me. They were sitting in the parking lot of the Kashmir Woodland National Park, and Earl had been nice enough to drive her out here. She had brought a backpack of some things that she would need before she turned, but Earl had insisted that he wanted to come with her. He said that he would just camp out in the woods, wait for her to come back, and then the two of them would leave together. She had insisted that it was dangerous and that he didn't have to go. He could just go home and wait for her, and she would be back tomorrow. Earl had said that was silly, and she wouldn't hurt him, and that it would be fine. You don't need to worry, Candace. I'll be all right. I've got my wolf's bane that I'm going to sprinkle around the campsite after you're gone, and I've got a bunch of mothballs that I'm going to put around so that there's no way you'll come back and gobble me up. Candace looked dubious, but she said she would be willing to give it a try. She honestly liked the idea of having someone out in the woods in case something went wrong. There was always a chance that when she was in her wolf form, something that happened a couple of times a month, she might climb a tree or fall into a lake or do something else that would result in her having trouble when she regained her human form. She liked going into the woods around Kashmir because there wasn't really anything out there that could hurt her, and there were fewer chances of finding something that you could hurt, like people she liked. She would hunt some deer and run around and get it all out of her system somewhere where no one ever went. The idea that Earl would also be out there made her feel like the chances of something happening were a lot higher, but she was willing to let him try. Okay, if you're sure. I just don't want you to get hurt or anything. The two of them climbed out of Earl's truck, Earl bringing his own backpack out of the back of the old Ford pickup, and the two of them hiked into the woods so they could begin their 2-day camping trip. Earl would be alone tonight, but Candace had agreed to camp with him for real the next night, so the two of them could experience nature together. That way, it would be like they had taken a little romantic trip instead of her just waking up naked in the woods and then coming home. Earl liked to camp, so it was nice to finally get to do so with his girlfriend. He'd been an avid hiker most of his life, and he was looking forward to spending a night in the woods, something he didn't get to do very often. The two of them headed deep into Kashmir woods, a place that had been a lot quieter lately. People didn't report seeing strange creatures as often as they used to, and the rate of disappearances in the woods had really gone down a lot. Earl and Candace weren't the only couple that had been talking about heading into the woods to commune with nature, but they were probably the couple that was going the deepest. They found a place just as the sun had really begun to sink, and Candace helped Earl set up his tent and began laying out the logs for the fire. She showed him how to sprinkle the wolf's bane so that she couldn't come back and eat him, and he put the mothballs around to keep everything else away. Earl had told her time and time again that nothing liked the smell of mothballs, and it was probably almost as good as wolfsbane when it came to repelling things. Earl had a healthy fire going by the time Candace started to feel the first tingles of the transformation, and she kissed him on the forehead before running off into the woods so that she wouldn't be able to hurt him when the change finally came over her. Earl watched her disappear into the trees, feeling oddly empty, but also glad that he had done this. He took out some hot dogs and started making dinner, cooking them over the fire as he listened to the sounds of nature unfurl around him. He could hear the bugs and the night birds, the sound of bats and the scamper of possums as they went about their way. Earl leaned back against the log that he'd been using as a chair and looked at the stars, the light pollution this far out of town almost non-existent. He liked to sit in the field near the graveyard sometimes, on clear nights, counting the stars and remembering the constellations he had learned when he was a kid. Earl liked camping because the chances of running into a ghost out here were pretty slim, and it was relaxing in a way that many things often weren't. When he heard the crunch of footsteps coming closer, he shifted a little as if expecting to see the shaggy face of his beloved. The steps were too light, though. He had seen her in her beastly form, and it was much too large to walk that quietly. This was something else, something less monstrous, and as it came closer to his campsite, he saw that it was a person. It was a middle-aged man in jeans and a poncho, a bag slung over his shoulder as he came through the woods as if it were nothing more than a hike. He noticed Earl and waved at him, approaching the fire with a big smile on his face. "Good evening. It's rare to find someone out in the woods like this. Do you mind if I have a seat? I've been walking for such a long time." "Sure," Earl said, a little bit relieved to see it was another person. "Drag up a log. I've got hot dogs if you want one. There's a little tea in the jug, or I can make some coffee if you're looking for something warm." "Thanks very much," the man said. "I might let you talk me into one of those hot dogs, and a glass of tea would be very appreciated. I've been wandering around the woods for quite some time, and I think I might be a little lost. I'm looking for the town of Cashmere. You don't happen to know where it is, do you?" "Well, sure. I've lived there a long time." "Excellent. Maybe you could point me in the right direction. I seem to be lost, and it seems like the town can be a bit troublesome to find." Earl started to point him in the right direction, and then got a funny feeling. People usually knew how to find the town if they were going there, and it was rare to find someone lost out here. Could it be that he wasn't supposed to be there? He had seen the posters about reporting strangers who just wandered into town, and he knew that one of the deputies had been seen at the bus depot talking to new arrivals. It also seemed weird that this guy was just out wandering in a patch of woods that most locals knew to be dangerous. A lot of things didn't make sense, and Earl suddenly wasn't so sure that he wanted to show the man how to get to Cashmere. Tell you what, why don't you set a spell with me until my fiancé gets back, and then we'll take you into town ourselves." The man smiled wide enough to make Earl afraid he might lose the top of his head, but there wasn't any real substance to it. "Well, I don't want to be any bother." "No bother at all," Earl assured him. "Cashmere is a real neighborly place. I'd consider it an honor if you'd let me help you." The man smiled all the bigger. "Very neighborly indeed. I come from a place like that. A very tight-knit community, where we like to help people, too. I wonder, friend, would you mind if I spoke to you for a minute about something?" "I suppose it couldn't hurt," Earl said, never being able to guess what the subject matter might be, and that it could very well hurt. "You see, I belong to this little organization called the Bright Farm. We keep livestock, we grow crops, and we just do all kinds of things in service to the Bright. Have you ever heard of the Bright, friend?" "I can't say that I have," Earl said, as he tried to keep his voice steady. Earl had heard of a dozen or more strange religions that seemed to float around Cashmere, but none of them had anything to do with this Bright or its people. Well, that's okay. The Bright teaches us to speak to people wherever we find them. It's a very close-knit group. We like to help each other, and we like to help people who may be lost or looking for something. Is there anything you're looking for, Earl? Earl shook his head, but felt a little jolt in his stomach when the man said his name. Earl did not remember having introduced himself. Really? You don't need anything? Can't say as I do, friend. I have everything I need. Nice place to rest, good friends, the love of a good woman, and a job that makes me feel fulfilled. As far as most people are concerned, I'm the richest man in the world. The man laughed in the face of Earl's less than sure chuckle. I suppose most people would say that you are. Most people want all kinds of things, Earl, whether it's stability or money or even just companionship. Everybody needs something, Earl, so it's rare to find someone who has everything. Maybe you'd be interested in helping people find that sense of fulfillment that you already enjoy. Would you like that? Would you like to help bring joy to others? Earl put his hands in his pockets to keep them from shaking. This guy was a little weird, a little creepy, and Earl was suddenly very sure that he did not want to take him back in town. He felt certain that if he did bring him to Kashmir, it would be so he could turn him over to the sheriff, or maybe to the mayor. He certainly didn't want anything to do with him, or whatever it was he was selling. I think I'll pass, buddy. I have a very good life in Kashmir, and I think that's where I'll probably end out my days. I just realized my fiancée might be a little longer than I thought she was going to be. The town is in that direction, he said, pointing in the opposite direction from where the truck was parked. Why don't you go ahead and head that way, and maybe I'll see you in Kashmir or one of these days. The man didn't move. He just sat right there, smiling at him as he shook his head slowly. Now, that wasn't particularly friendly. You and I both know that isn't the direction of the town. You're trying to send me off on a wild goose chase, aren't you, Earl? Earl thought about lying to him, but Earl had never been very good at lying. If you knew which way the town was, why did you ask me? Because the town doesn't want me to find it. It doesn't seem to want any of us to find it. The town is confused. It's been given bad information. We could be of great benefit to the town and its people. We could all be great friends, maybe even family. All you have to do is let us in. Oh, I think if the town doesn't want you in it, then neither do I, Earl said as he cut him off. I don't understand what's going on, but I'm pretty sure that we're done talking. I think I'd like you to move on now. I think I'd like you to head off into the woods back the way you came. The man got up, smiling, as he took a step towards Earl. Oh, I don't think so. I think I'm going to sit here and let you see what the Bright has in store. I think that maybe once you get a look at the Bright, you won't be able to help yourself. You'll serve us, Earl, because it's what you were born to do. The man reached into his pocket and took out a book, opening it as something bright and eye-watering began spilling out from the pages. Earl put a hand up to block his eyes, but it seemed to shine even through his fingers and the skin of his hand. It was assaulting him from all sides, and Earl felt he might start screaming if that light didn't go away very soon. He should have chased the guy off when he came, but Earl had been trying to be friendly, and now it appeared that it was going to cost him. He started crawling away from the fire, crawling towards the darkness that lay just outside his campsite, but the man kept following him, no matter how far he went. As the light pressed down on Earl, he began to hear church music and see things that didn't quite make sense. He saw people like this man gathered together. He heard them worship the bright, and as that light filled him, Earl began to wonder why he had resisted so hard. He began to ask himself why he didn't give it a try. He didn't understand why he had been so hesitant to speak about the bright. It truly was beautiful, and he suddenly wanted to know everything about it. When the light was cut off, he looked up in confusion and saw that the man was shaking and convulsing as the book tumbled from his hands and smoldered on the ground. A large furry hand had closed over the man's shoulder, the bones in his chest smushed inward like some kind of accordion. It was Candace, it had to be, and as she pulled the man into the woods, Earl heard the crunching begin. He dragged himself back towards the light, the closest thing to the brightness he could find. Then he pulled himself into a fetal ball as his mind tried to push out the influence of the dastardly bright. He tried with all his might, but as he lay there and waited for morning to overtake him, he realized that the seeds had been planted, and now he just had to see what grew from that poisonous field. "How long have you been in the underprison?" The man was bedraggled, his clothes hanging off him like streamers, but he refused to leave the underprison until everyone else was taken and rehoused. He was an older man, mid-60s or maybe early 70s, and despite the fact that he was malnourished and appeared to be filthy, he was in fine spirits. Dr. Winters didn't think she had ever seen anyone in better spirits than this man. It was hard to explain, but he seemed to be radiating an aura of calmness that made her want to smile and believe that everything was going to be okay. "Not long, 2 or 3 years perhaps. Who can remember? In the underprison, time doesn't mean much." "You're very well spoken. Most of the guys down here barely have the words anymore to tell me how they feel." The old man shook his head slowly, the ghost of a frown creasing his mouth. "Poor things. They aren't used to living in the dark like this. Few are, but some of them have been here for decades. I talk to them, I soothe them, I make their time a little better." "Is that why you refuse to leave?" "Yes. I will not leave until all of them are safe. It's my job, and I take it very seriously." Winter nodded as she made notes on her chart. She had to meet him here in one of the under-prison cells, because otherwise, he said that not being here would cause the other prisoners extreme mental anguish. She didn't believe him at first. Inmates like to boast and brag, but after speaking with him for a little while, she believed he might actually be telling the truth. He didn't seem like your typical inmate either. There was something different about him. She suspected that he might be one of the people that her brother had simply put here because he needed him. "Why are you in the underprison?" "Because I was too good at my job." "Did my brother place you here? I can't seem to find any information on you, but it's not as uncommon as you might think. I can't find a DC number, a court date, a sentence, or anything. I'm trying to decide if we'll be rehousing you here or if you'll be free to go, but I need information to make that assessment." "Free to go." The old man seemed to taste it as he spoke the words, and he found that he liked them. "I don't think I've ever felt free to go. I'm not sure I'd know what it was like. Have you been incarcerated most of your life? In one sense or another, I suppose I have. Sir, I need information, or I'm going to have to assume that you're an inmate and send you to E-dorm with all the others. If you're a free man, then I don't want to have to do that, but I won't have much of a choice. He shrugged, and the motion looked ghastly. I would honestly say that it's probably the best thing for the prison that I stay. I've been here for a very long time, and my presence keeps a certain amount of order here. It radiates out like a soothing wind. I'm sure you felt it in your brief time here. I'm sure the warden would tell you the same. He would say that it would be a detriment to Stagview for me to leave, but that's only because he is selfish. His selfishness is the other reason that I'm here. I was free for a time, free to live my life as I chose, but he just couldn't handle that. I might know a little something about that, Dr. Winters said. I believe you might. I got the idea that the warden is some kin of yours, a cousin maybe, or a brother, I suspect. I think you are also kin to the other fellow who comes in. Maybe the three of you are siblings or some close relation. If you don't mind me saying so, you all even look a little bit alike. Dr. Winters wasn't sure if she was insulted or not, but decided to laugh and feel amused instead. Well, I've never heard that one before. Most people say that no one looks like the warden. That's his glamour, the man said with all seriousness. He surrounds himself in oddness, but I can see beyond that a little. I think he wants to change, but he's afraid of what might happen if he changes too much. He'll never be good. He's not capable, but he is capable of being less cruel. Your brother is like a dragon in many ways. He is content to sleep for hundreds of years on top of his hoarded treasures, us in this case, but he is capable of awakening and causing great destruction when the mood takes him. I think you may be a little like that as well. Sometimes, Dr. Winters said as she made notes, I think maybe all of us are like that a little bit. Not to his extent. The problem is that his span of contentment never lasts long. Inevitably, he must rise and destroy. It's in his nature, like the frog and the scorpion. The frog and the scorpion? Winter asked, not understanding. It's a very old story. I told it to your brother once, and he seemed to find it funny. A scorpion is waiting on the riverbank and trying to cross. A frog comes along, and the scorpion asks him if he can ride on his back across the river. The frog scoffs and tells him that he will poison him with his stinger, and he will die if he lets him climb on his back. The scorpion asks why he would do such a thing. He tells him that if he were to do this, then they would both drown and die. The frog thinks about this and decides that he will take the scorpion across the river. When he gets halfway across, the frog feels the sting press into him and turns to find that the scorpion has stung him. As the two sink into the river, the frog yells at the scorpion that now they will both die and asks him what the point of it was. The scorpion only shrugs as they sink below the water and tells the frog that he was right, that it was in his nature. Dr. Winters nodded as the man spoke, seeing the wisdom in the story. Her brother was a lot like that. He could be kind, even compassionate, where his family was concerned, but inevitably he would sting and he would kill. He had to. It was in his nature. She supposed, when you came right down to it, it might be in her nature as well. Well, if you won't leave today, and you won't tell me anything about your situation, then why did you ask to see me? I wanted you to meet with someone specific, someone who is afraid to talk to you. Afraid to talk to me? She asked. Why would they be afraid to talk to me? I've done nothing to bring out such fear. The young man has been wrong. He's been here for some time, but he believes you might be in league with the warden. The warden put him here for no other reason than to shut him up, and despite my best efforts, he refuses to believe that talking to you will do anything but get him in more trouble. I'd like you to speak with him and convince him otherwise." Dr. Winters thought about this for a moment. She'd seen nearly everyone in the under prison, even if it was just briefly, and she couldn't remember anyone like the man this fellow was talking about. Maybe that was the point. If she hadn't seen him, then she supposed it would be their first meeting, and maybe if he believed that she meant him harm, he had been avoiding her. "If you take me to him, I'll be glad to talk. I'm certainly not here to do him any harm, and I would hope that he would see that we've been getting people out of here instead of keeping them down here. That's the thing. I think he believes those people are being killed once they get out of here." Dr. Winters stiffened. Why would he think that? "You have to understand, this fellow has a lot of information on your brother. He's been collecting stories about him, and that's what got him in here. He's been collecting first-hand accounts from inmates, ex-officers, and current officers, even some people on the outskirts of the prison. He feels that he knows what your brother is, and he feels that anyone who leaves the under prison is probably dead. I've tried to convince him otherwise, tried to convince him that the people do get out, but he won't hear it. He says that if he stays down here, then he is safe, but if he lets one of you talk him into going topside, he's as good as dead." Dr. Winters told the man to lead the way, and they went to find this strangely paranoid fellow. Ever since the battle for Stragview, the under prison had become more of an open-air dormitory. The cells had been thrown open, and most of the inmates just wandered around aimlessly. The really dangerous ones, or the ones who were a danger to themselves, had been processed out first, and now they were left with those who were mentally broken, or those who had been down here so long that they had turned a little funny. Some of them hadn't seen daylight in quite some time, and they hid towards the back of the under prison so that the light coming in through the door wouldn't touch them. The fellow they went to see was one of them, a young-looking man with long, bedraggled hair and a strangely manic expression that made her think he might have been down here too long to be helped. He moved to the back of the cell when he saw her, making a strange moaning noise in the back of his throat. But when the calming inmate went over to talk to him, he spoke softly to him as the two conversed. Finally, after a few minutes of back and forth, the man looked at Dr. Winters and scrambled slowly towards her. He walked on his hands and the fronts of his feet, looking like an ape in some old movie. And when he spoke, she could tell that he wasn't used to doing it above much more than a whisper. "My name is Andrew Davis. I'm here because I wrote a book about the Warden of Stragview. I would like to leave and go home. Someone may be looking for me. I'd like to let them know that I'm okay." Dr. Winters nodded and made notes. "Okay, Mr. Davis, what sort of book did you write about the Warden?" I told the truth," he insisted. "I never told lies. It was always what other people said. They sent me letters when they heard I was writing a story about the prison, and they told me their stories. They told me about all the weird stuff that happened around here, all the ghosts and monsters, and even about the most monstrous of them all, the Warden. Some of them were letters that were smuggled out by inmates. Some of them were letters that had been sent anonymously by guards. People are afraid of him. People who shouldn't be afraid of him are afraid of him. He's a bad man, and I'm afraid that he's never going to let me out of here. What's worse, I'm afraid that he is going to let me out of here, and that I'll go somewhere much worse. I'm afraid that he'll either kill me or that there's a worse prison waiting for me. Mr. Davis, what is the crime that brought you here?" Have you been listening? There is no crime. He simply didn't like my book and decided to lock me in the under-prison to shut me up. I never did anything. I just collected stories. I have to get out of here, but I'm terrified to get out of here. I need to be assured that he's not going to come after me, and that I'm not going to end up in a place like this again. I need to disappear, and it may be beneficial if I don't remember why I was here in the first place. Dr. Winters looked up from her notes. You're asking me to take your memories. I am. It seems like the only way I ever truly am going to be safe from the warden. He's never going to stop. Even if he says he will, he's never going to stop. If I'm going to disappear, then I have to forget most everything. That being said, if I give you a letter to send to somebody, would you mail it? More importantly, would you do it and not tell your brother? If you're sure this is what you want, Dr. Winters said, and when the man nodded, Dr. Winters reached out and put her hands on either side of his head. Are you ready? Do it. Do it before I lose my nerve. Dr. Winters cycled through his memories, seeing what had led him to this place. She saw the creation of his book, felt the fear when he knew the warden was closing in on him, and sensed the dread deep within him when he realized there was no escape. Then she felt the hidden desire for it all to end as he sat down here in the dark. He kept telling himself the stories again and again so he would never forget them. But after a while, it had been like a knife twisting in his guts. Nothing mattered anymore, and he simply wanted to rip off the Band-Aid and be done. It was brutal, and it was ultimately self-destructive, but he knew it was the only way that he could escape her brother. This man was not her. He was not even a match for the terrible interests of the warden. If he left, he would eventually start telling stories again. And then the warden would find him. She took them all and put them in one of the jars that she kept in her bag. It glowed a little as it sat there, and when the man slumped forward, she took him to the stairwell with the help of the bedraggled old man who had started all of this. The guards took him from her and helped him up the stairs. They would help him find clothes and figure out where he would go after he left the prison. But her part in all of this was over. What about you? She asked as she turned back to the old man. The man smiled. I told you, whenever every inmate is out of this place, then I will go. Until then, I am the guard of the underprison, and I am the one who stays here for all of them. Dr. Winters left not long after that. She had never met someone who embodied selflessness like this man did. She hoped he knew what he was doing, and she hoped that one day he too would earn his freedom. The underprison would soon be empty. It would soon be just another hole where they used to keep people. But there was still work to do, and Dr. Winters would gladly do it for as long as it went on. Hey guys, I know it's been a while. It's your favorite park ranger, back from a long winter and ready to finally get some spring in our little slice of heaven here in North Georgia. Winter was pretty long. It always seems to go on forever, and the park likes to operate with a skeleton crew during the cold months. For the most part, the park is closed, but there's always something that needs doing. Most of the time, my post operates with 3 rangers and a volunteer who mans the phones. But there's always trees to cut back, roads to be cleared, and utility paths that need to be salted. I looked up one morning as I was cutting a deadfall and imagined that I saw smoke rising over the trees. The way it was moving, I almost thought it was a train. And if I hadn't seen the forest train, I might have thought that was a little bit silly. It disappeared after about 5 minutes, the smoke just kind of descending behind the trees, And as it went away, I went back to my cutting like business as usual. Most of what we've been dealing with this winter is wildlife in the campsites. The winter months are hard on the animals sometimes, and you get a lot of bears and scavengers in the dumpsters outside the campsites. The garbage trucks don't usually come up here in the snow, so whatever's in those cans when they close the park for winter is usually still there come spring. I know, it's a dumb way to do things, but you try arguing with the sanitation guys about why they should have to bring those big green trucks up here and risk skidding off the side of an access road. Most of the scavengers are more than willing to leave if you bang on a trash can with a big stick, but every now and again you get an angry bear or a grumpy bobcat that's just trying to get a little snack before it goes to lie back down. I had to hightail it back to my pickup truck a couple of months ago because I banged on the side of a dumpster and out came a pretty mad brown bear. Luckily, I left the keys in the ignition, and all I got was a big scratch down the side of my Range Rover, rather than a quick trip to the morgue. Most of the concern now is cleanup. They like to eat the remains of the food and the garbage, but they're not so big on picking up after themselves. A couple of times a month, a few of us end up bundling up and going to pick up the refuse from the campsites, so that they're nice and clean once the tourists decide that they want to come back again. Which brings me to today. We're coming up on March, and April is the official start of the season. That's the day when the parks will officially open to the campers. And there's always a dozen or so people who want to bring their pop-ups or their tents and come and enjoy the last of the winter weather before spring comes in full force. It is sort of pretty out here, but I'm not sure I would want to hunker down in a tent and experience it. This leads me to today's problem. The snow on the west side of the little mountain in the middle of the park refuses to go away. It's the weirdest thing. The snowfall here stopped about 2 weeks ago, after the last big blizzard. But if you take out your binoculars and get close enough, you can literally watch the snow coming down on the west side of the mountain. It's not uncommon on the peaks. Some of them are high enough that there's always a little bit of snow up there, but this is near the valley floor, and we've been experiencing temperatures between 50 and 60 during the daylight hours. That's a little warm for snow, and it's been driving the senior rangers nuts. We cannot have tourists going up there and getting stuck. We need to find out what's going on. I've got a couple of guys from the Meteorological Foundation coming out to have a look. I'd like a couple of my rangers at post number 2 to accompany them so that we can find out what's going on out there. I trust that you all won't have any problems walking them around. I did not say that maybe the senior rangers would like to walk them around while we were still clearing up deadfalls and cleaning roads for the upcoming season, but I sure did think it. The guy from the Meteorological Foundation showed up Wednesday. I'm not a studly jock or anything, but these guys looked like they probably spent most of their high school experience in a locker. Most of them wore thick glasses, had old acne scars, carried big laptops in industrial-sized bags, and looked like they had just accepted that hair wasn't going to be in their future. They were nice enough, all bundled up in their North Face jackets and sensible hiking boots, and the fella they stuck me with was named Dudley. I made a joke about the cartoon character, but he didn't seem to get it. Maybe he wasn't a Rocky and Bullwinkle fan, I don't know. We set out for the mountain to see what exactly was going on, and Ranger Steven went with another fella, heavyset guy named Clyde. We rode for about an hour until we got to the spot, and I helped Dudley set his tent up so that he could start taking samples and monitoring weather patterns. The computer that he had in his bag was pretty impressive for a laptop. It had all the bells and whistles so he could connect to the nearby satellites, and before long he was checking weather patterns and looking at charts that sort of looked like gibberish to me. "It's the weirdest thing," he said, after looking at the computer for about 30 minutes. "There's no reason for the snow. There are no particularly active cumulonimbus clouds, and the weather conditions aren't even particularly right for snowfall. Yet, the snow falls, the snow sticks, and what's more, it's accumulated about 5 inches. I've never seen anything like this in all my years with the Foundation. I nodded along like I understood what he was talking about, but I'd been a little distracted since we got out here. I kept hearing this weird noise when the wind would gust down, and the snow patter would quiet for just a moment. It sounded like someone yelling for help. It was croaky, like someone who'd been out in the elements for a while, but they were very clearly yelling for help. I always looked up anytime I heard it, like I might see somebody who was lost and just wandering around looking for people, but they never got close enough for me to tell much about them. If Dudley heard them, then he never said anything. He was glued to his computer as he checked numbers and programs, and I kept looking back at him to see if he had noticed. Dudley took some snow samples, and soon he had a little folding table with some equipment on it near the back of the tent. He was testing the water content in the snow, as well as some other things that he had found in it. I don't want to try to explain it and just sound like an idiot, but I guess he knew what he was doing. He was working with the snow melt and trying to decide why it was coming down like it did. That's when I heard someone cry for help again. I finally asked Dudley if he heard it, but he flapped a hand at me and said it was probably just the wind. The wind had been really howling out there, but the wind never really sounds like that. I told him I was going to take a walk for a minute and have a look around. He told me to go right ahead. He said he wasn't planning to go play out in the snow any more than he had to, and he really just wanted to gather data on the water content and the environmental conditions for such an event. I pulled my coat around me, pulling my muffler up so that I wouldn't get frostbite on my face, and headed out into the snow. Down in the valley, it had been 65 degrees that day, but here on the mountain, it felt like about 2 or 3 degrees with the wind and the snow. I could hear someone yelling for help, but the wind kept blowing it away before I could get anywhere close to it. I put my gloved hands in my armpits, wishing I'd worn thicker gloves, and suddenly I heard it clear as day. Someone had broken through the croak in their voice and had shouted for someone to help them. I didn't know who it was or where they were, but I started heading in that direction, and that was how I found the crevice. I say I found it, but it honestly found me. One minute I was walking on semi-firm snow, and the next, my foot came down on nothing but a thin crust of ice, and I was suddenly falling. I spun around and grabbed, trying to find anything to hang on to, but between my mittens and the slippery terrain, I didn't come up with a lot. I started falling into a crevice in the ice, and as I reached out for the wall to brace myself, I started slowing down in my descent. It was difficult, but I managed not to break my legs in the 10-foot hole in the ground. The remains that I fell on were not so lucky. I came down hard on the bones of someone who had fallen in before me. Some of them broke, some of them just bounced around, but when I glanced down between my feet, I saw a skull with a crack along one side. I wondered if this is who I'd been hearing, and as if on cue, there was a voice from the crevice that yelled up towards the sky. "Help! Won't someone help me? My leg is broken. Please help me!" Poor bastard. He'd probably been hiking out here and fallen into the crevice by accident. It sounded as if he'd broken his leg, and by the look of the skull that I had nearly landed on, he'd probably given himself one hell of a skull fracture on the way down. He'd probably sat there in the dark and just gone out when nobody found him. On a whim, I reached down and took the skull and put it in my backpack. There wasn't a lot in there, an extra tarp, some granola bars, and a little bit of water, but I picked up as many of the bones as I could find, and I put them in the extra tarp with the skull. It seemed only right. The poor guy had probably been down here long enough, and maybe he would stop yelling if the remains were removed somewhere else. As I got the last of the remains into the tarp, I heard a softer voice, whisper from the bottom of the crevice, and I knew that this was what he wanted. "Thank you. Thank you for getting me out." I stripped off my gloves and started climbing up through the hole. My hands were numb after about 10 minutes of climbing, but it wasn't really as difficult as I had expected. With the snow still coming down up top, I had expected it to be slippery and to probably fall a few times before I made it out. To my surprise, my hands actually started to regain feeling after about 20 minutes of climbing. It was hard to maneuver inside the crevice, but I could feel moisture from the top that was different than the snow had been. I didn't know what to make of it, but I was glad for whatever help I could get at this point. I came up out of the crevice to find that the snow had melted. It was all gone, and what was left behind was nothing but mud and yellow-brown grass. I was peeking out like a gopher, looking for spring, and it appeared that I had found it. I glanced at my backpack and wondered if maybe the remains had been responsible. But that was silly. Who made snow? I didn't believe we'd had any weather wizards up here in the last couple of decades, so I climbed carefully out and made my way back to Dudley and his little campsite. Dudley was looking around in amazement as I came back from my little walk. He said it was the strangest thing. About 30 minutes ago, the snow had stopped falling and had started melting. It had stopped coming down, and it had warmed up considerably as the wind stopped blowing. He said it all just melted in a matter of minutes, and he was left speechless as he tried to make sense of all of it. I believe we may have been trapped in an area of strange and unknowable meteorological significance. That's the only explanation I can come up with, at least. There's no reason for the snow to have simply stopped and melted other than a shift in weather patterns or something. I can't really speculate until I get back to the weather center and run the data, but I wouldn't be surprised if people are talking about this for years to come. He may not have an answer for it, but I think maybe I do. I think our mysterious hiker must have gotten lost in a late-season snowstorm and just brought the snow with him somehow. Maybe his ghost was upset about dying in the mountains and he just made it keep snowing. I don't know. This place is frankly weird enough that nothing seems too strange anymore. I took the remains back to the ranger station, and a couple of weeks later, the police told me the dental records matched a Howard Drake, an avid hiker who'd gone missing about 3 years ago. Why he had only now brought the snow to the mountain was a mystery, but some of the other rangers said that this year's snowstorm was one of the worst they'd had in about a decade. Maybe it had reminded Howard of the day that he had perished, and his ghost had decided that if he had to live in a cold, dark hole, then everyone else would have to deal with the snow. This park just keeps getting weirder and weirder, and I can't say as I don't enjoy my time here. Who knows, maybe this year will be full of lots of fun adventures, and I'll get to tell you all about them. Okay, class, settle down, settle down. The kids were all assembled in the auditorium of Kashmir Elementary. The sheriff had been adamant that all grades needed to attend the assembly. It was something that the mayor had wanted, and if the mayor wanted it, then it got done. They were all buzzing with nervous excitement, and as the principal brought them all to attention, or as close to attention as a room full of 6 to 12-year-olds ever got, they began today's mandatory assembly. As many of you know, Kashmir is having a problem with new people walking in. Now, not all new people are bad. We've got a wonderful community here, and we get a lot of new friends from the people who arrive at Kashmir in the way that they're supposed to. The problem is that some of these people are strangers, and strangers are not to be trusted. "What's the difference?" someone asked, and Principal Smith was pretty sure that it was Tommy Lamar. Tommy was something of a cut-up, and he often thought he was funnier than he actually was. An excellent question. The people who arrive because the town wants them to be there are supposed to be here. Kashmir knows the kind of people that it wants in town, and it calls out to those people. Many of you may be here because the town called to your parents and led them here. But strangers are not supposed to be here. The town does not want them, and they are not allowed to come to our town. There were some low mumbles from many of the students, and more than a few of them seemed confused. It seems as if some of you may need a little more direction. That's why we have Sheriff Guthrie here, who has agreed to come and speak to you about strangers. Sheriff Guthrie, are you ready to talk to the students? Sheriff Guthrie came hesitantly out onto the stage and lifted his hand in greeting. He'd worn his special uniform, the one that he usually saved for funerals and for times when special visitors would be arriving at the station. He had worn his charcoal gray duty hat as well, the one with the big brass badge on the front. He walked out as if he wasn't sure what he was doing here either, and as the kids applauded quietly, most of them sounding unsure of what to do, Sheriff Guthrie thanked the principal and began his presentation. Thank you, Principal Smith. Kids, I'm here to talk about strangers. There's nothing wrong with meeting new people. Meeting people is how you make friends. It's how you find people who like the same things that you do. And we're certainly not telling you not to be friendly. Kashmir is a very friendly, neighborly town, and we want you kids to be welcoming to the new people. The people that we're talking about today are strangers, and strangers are dangerous. Sheriff Guthrie looked behind him as a screen came down, and when he nodded to Officer Parks, the deputy gave him a thumbs up and turned on the projector as he clicked on the first slide. Some people are only strangers because we haven't met them yet, Sheriff Guthrie went on, as he showed them a picture of the bus depot and of the smiling man who sat behind the counter. The smile looked fake as hell, but only Guthrie would have realized that. The kid who sat at the bus station was kind of an asshole, but he was usually nice to kids, and he was generally pretty agreeable to the people who lived in the town. The people who work at the bus station are always kind to new arrivals. They make them feel welcome, so they'll come and stay in Kashmir. Kashmir is a town that needs people. We need people to teach our students, to pump our gas, to check us out at the store, to teach us music, and to clean our streets. The town of Kashmir has grown a lot in the past several years, he said, as a new slide clicked over, showing the borders of the town expanding slightly. And with more town comes more needs. Needs like houses, streets, and all the things that come with that. What I'm here to warn you about today are the strangers. Officer Parks clicked over to another slide, and Sheriff Guthrie saw some of the kids flinch a little. The slide was of a smiling man with a book in his hand who was offering them a pamphlet. He was dressed in a long brown robe that made him look a little like a priest, and around his neck was a sunburst on a string. The mayor had cooked up the image from descriptions of the bright people, and even though Sheriff Guthrie had never seen one of them, he had heard them, and he thought this was probably what they looked like. The strangers want to poison you, not with candy or with bad food. They want to poison you with ideas. The strangers are interested in something called indoctrination. Do any of you kids know what indoctrination is? A few of them raised their hands, some of the older ones, and Guthrie pointed to a girl in a polka dot sundress near the front, who stood up and pushed her glasses up her nose. Indoctrination is when you use ideas to change somebody and make them a part of your group or organization. That's right, Sheriff Guthrie said. These people want to use ideas to change you. They want to use ideas to change the town. They aren't interested in being part of the community. They want to change it into something that they want. Kashmir is a perfectly fine community. We have our bad apples. Every community does. But we are a close group of people, and we want to keep it that way. The strangers want to come in and change everything about our way of life. They have strange ideas and a strange religion. You don't want to change who you are just because a bunch of people want you to, do you? The kids shook their heads, and Sheriff Guthrie heard a chorus of no's from the kiddos. That's right. So we have to be safe, and we have to be smart. If you see a stranger in town, someone talking about something called the Bright, or someone handing out pamphlets about a new religion, come get an adult. Tell them what you saw and that you need help so they can help you. Some of these people are very nice. They smile a lot. They tell you they want to get you things or they want to help you with things. Do not believe them. They're trying to indoctrinate you, and indoctrination is not something that you want. Come get a police officer or find your parents, but get away from them as quickly as you can. There were some more low murmurs from the kids, and then a couple of them put their hands up. Sheriff Guthrie decided to call on a few of them, and he pointed to a boy in the front row. The little kid couldn't have been older than about 7 or 8, and when he stood up, he hitched his pants up before they could fall to his ankles. What do we do if a stranger tries to take us away? That's a really good question. You fight, you kick, you yell, and bring people over to help you. Let those people know that you don't know this person, and they're trying to do things that you don't want them to do. The people of Kashmir have always helped each other, and they will make the strangers go away. Guthrie hated how childish he had to be with these kids, but he didn't want to scare them any more than he had to. They were still children, after all, and he didn't want to tell them that these people would change their minds and ruin them. He didn't want to tell them that these people were capable of mind control and manipulation, and that even if they got away from them, they still might hold those ideas deep in their heads or their hearts. That was the kind of thing that a grown-up would need to hear, but not these kids. Not yet. He chose a little girl near the back row next, and as she stood up, he realized she might have been closer to middle school than elementary school. Why exactly are the strangers bad? Just because they want to tell us things? Shouldn't we want to listen? You said our community grows because everybody has a part to play, so why aren't these people part of that play or whatever? Sheriff Guthrie bit his lower lip. That was actually a really good question, but it was also a hard question. What's your name? Margaret. Margaret Cunningham. Well, Margaret, everyone in Kashmir does have a part to play, but these people want to take away those parts. They want to make everyone the same, and they want to ensure that everyone is doing exactly what they want them to do. What makes this town so unique is that people are allowed to pursue things that make them happy. These people want us to pursue what they want, and that wouldn't make anyone happy. Do you understand? I think so, she said. But when she sat down, Sheriff Guthrie wondered. Any other questions? Sheriff Guthrie asked as he looked around. There were a few other questions. A little boy asked if they could shoot the strangers, and Sheriff Guthrie told him that might not be such a good idea. Another little girl asked what would happen if her parents wanted to join the strangers, and Sheriff Guthrie told her that she needed to come and talk to a police officer if that was the case. He told her that mommies and daddies could get confused as well, and they wouldn't be in any trouble, but the townspeople needed to talk to them about not listening to the strangers. An older boy, who looked like he might be slated for middle school next year, asked if the strangers would want to do things to them without their clothes on. Some of the kids laughed, but the kid was so earnest about it that the sheriff wondered if he might need to do a home visit. He didn't look like he was making a joke. He didn't look like he was trying to get a laugh out of his friends. The kid looked scared and worried that there might be a new predator to replace an old one. Sheriff Guthrie would have to ask the principal about that kid after the assembly. The questions mostly dried up after that. A few questions about whether they would come at night or whether they would hide in people's closets or in their backyards. And then the principal told them all to thank Sheriff Guthrie for his time and to give him a big round of applause. The kids clapped, and Sheriff Guthrie smiled as he bowed a little. It wasn't hard to talk to kids. Mostly, you could just be honest with them, though not in a way that would scare them. If they'd been voting in a couple of months, Sheriff Guthrie felt pretty sure that he'd have this election in the bag. It wasn't the kids he needed to impress, though. As it stood with the adults, Sheriff Guthrie needed to do something about the strangers, or he could kiss his badge and his town goodbye. It had been a while since I'd had a stalker at the Botanical Gardens, but it seemed I had one today. Winter had been fairly uneventful for the garden. We'd helped the prison with its problems, gotten through the Christmas event relatively unscathed, and then we'd simply closed our gates and stood by after New Year's. There had been no attacks by the Green Man, no retribution from his minions, and other than a little bit of business with a holiday spirit run amok, we had been allowed to rest and to plan. We had our setup mapped out for spring, and that had opened a few weeks early so that the guests could see the new layout. It was during one of those times that I noticed the old man who seemed to be tailing me. I say old. The guy appeared to be in his mid-50s with fairly straight posture and eyes that seemed to take in everything. I got the feeling that the cane he carried was more for aesthetic purposes than practical ones, and I wondered if he might be up to something or have something hidden in it. He looked a little bit like Sean Connery in the Highlander movie, and his crystal blue eyes bore into me as if I owed his family a blood debt. I'd never seen the man before, and I figured he was just somebody's grandfather who had wandered off and would soon be picked up again. Maybe I reminded him of someone that he had known in his youth, or maybe I reminded him of something that he had seen that he couldn't quite remember. But it wasn't until I came around the corner of a display bed and the cane was suddenly whistling towards my head that I realized he might be a threat. I slapped the cane aside with my hand, but he was already coming after me again. He was tall and still rather powerfully built, and he was holding the cane as if it were a rapier as he thrust and swiped at my face. I had my own sword out fairly quickly, thinking he might be some kind of assassin sent by the Winter Court or even the Green Man, and wanted to meet him head-on before he could get his feet under him. If the sight of my sword unnerved him, he gave no indication. And when he came in again, I expected the fairy steel to go right through his simple metal cane. It rang out instead, and I saw sparks fall into a nearby flower bed. When I turned to glower at him, he was grinning wolfishly. "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all. Let's see how you handle this." He flicked his wrist, and the metal cane slipped off to reveal a thin, flexible sword. He came in again, slicing and thrusting, and I stepped back as I tried to put some distance between us. I imposed my sword into the path of his blows, doing little more than keeping distance and swiping when I felt he was off balance. After a few minutes of trading blows, I was huffing and puffing like I'd run a mile. The old man didn't seem tired at all, and when I moved forward with a series of chops, he put aside the much larger weapon with ease. I was impressed and a little bit scared as we traded blows for a few more minutes, only the Brandylow stopping to watch. I kept expecting the guests to gather around or call for help, but they just kept moving around as if the two of us weren't having a sword fight a few feet away. I realized that none of the regular people could see us, and I expected that he might have thrown up some sort of glamour around us. That also made me think he might be from the other side of Fairy, and I pushed deeper into my mantle as I tried to hold him off. When we parted at long last, I kept my blade held defensively in case there was another attack forthcoming. The old man stood at the ready, his sword cane held out for a jab, and then he surprised me. He started laughing, and it came out as a booming basso that rolled over me like a warm breeze. "I see that Queen Titania had the right of you. You have promise, but your form's all wrong. You swing that sword like you've never held one before. You fight like somebody from an old action movie, maybe Conan the Barbarian or the Highlander." He even sounded a little like Sean Connery. His gray hair was pulled back into a small ponytail, and he had a pair of small gold glasses perched on his nose. He was dressed in flannel and jeans with shoes like you'd see on a hiking trail. And if he hadn't swung a cane at me, I'd have probably never noticed him. "Don't worry," he added with a wink, bending to pick up the cane sheath as he slid it back on. "I love a challenge." I smiled. I couldn't help myself. The man's presence was suddenly like a warm summer's day as he put his cane back on the ground and offered me his hand. His grip was firm, his bunched knuckles only cracking a little bit, and when he bowed, I thought again that the cane was mostly for show. "They call me Vanderhorn, Aurelius Vanderhorn. I've come to train you in the ways of the sword." "Well, that's awfully nice of you. I can't believe that Queen Titania sent you all the way down here to make sure I had a formal education." Vanderhorn smiled, showing me a mouthful of socially brown teeth, and I saw the brandylow around us begin to clap as the regular people continued about their day-to-day. "The Queen, despite her misgivings, is quite fond of the lady and her allies. She wants her to be safe. She wants her well protected, and if you are to be her champion, then you need to be able to fulfill the role. I'm here to teach you everything you'll need to know. I'm here to teach you swordsmanship and tactics and how to lead men into battle. I'm here to show you how to act when you're at the court, teach you protocol, and ensure that you don't embarrass yourself when it's time to stand beside your lady and your queen." I thanked him again, and that seemed to be when Tobias decided to come and see what all the fuss was about. "We have a lot of work to do, and spring will be upon us before—" He stopped talking when he saw Vanderhorn, and he rushed forward to shake the man's hand as if he were some sort of celebrity. "Mr. Vanderhorn, it's such an honor. What brings you to the garden? Are you here on court business?" "You could say that. Queen Titania sent me to train the new summer knight. So far, I've found him to be acceptable, if not a little green." "Well," Tobias said with a laugh, "green is usually the acceptable color for summer. Does the lady know that you're here?" "Not yet. I wanted to test her knight before I went to see her. Where might I find her? I feel now would likely be the appropriate time to tell her why I'm here." "Yes, she's in the greenhouse. I'll have someone lead you. Mistletoe, take Mr. Vanderhorn to the greenhouse and make introductions for him. The lady will want to know he's here straight away." Mistletoe, one of our new brandylow, came striding up to lead the old man towards the greenhouses. "I'll see you a little later, boy," Mr. Vanderhorn said as he headed off to make his courtesies. Some of the brandylow followed him, but most of them headed back to their duties. Spring was right around the corner, after all. "Hey, Tobias," I asked, before he could disappear into the crowd again. "Who is this guy? I've never heard of him, and he seems like a big deal." Tobias gave me a look that was hard to read. Tobias and I had been cordial but not friendly lately. He did not appreciate me standing up for the Barker during the Christmas season, and he'd been a little cold to me lately. I still suspected that he was trying to turn the other brandylow against him, but if he was, then he'd been doing it quietly. "Mr. Vanderhorn is a very important person in the summer court. He was the summer knight 2 nights ago. He's one of the greatest swordsmen the summer court has ever known. He saved Queen Titania from a champion of winter, and for this, he was allowed to retire with honors. Not something that a lot of summer knights get to achieve." That made me shiver. I had no intention of leaving the garden, but I assumed that when I got to be too old, they would simply pick a younger knight, and I would have to go back to what I was doing before. The idea that the position of summer knight might be until death wasn't something that I'd ever thought of. I could defend the lady with my life. That was a given, but I supposed I had always thought that my newfound power would make me nearly as immortal as she was. It seemed I might have to rethink that. How often do the summer nights retire? Tobias thought about it for a moment, scratching his furry chin before answering, I've only ever heard of 5, and Vanderhorn is the most renowned among them. He's certainly the only one of them who still has his mobility. Most of them are injured to the point where they can no longer be of service and are allowed to retire to care. Those are the lucky ones. Most retire from life at the same time they retire their mantle. Mr. Vanderhorn was allowed to retire in order to train other knights, and he's granted some of the summer court's immortality, so he may do so until he sees fit to lay his power down. How long has he been with the court? 600 or 700 years, maybe more. He has an extensive knowledge of swordplay. It was said that he fought in the Crusades, but it was likely some other lesser-known excursion into what many called the Holy Land. Tobias excused himself then, heading off to continue with his duties, and I was left to chew over that for a moment. I suppose there was nothing wrong with learning a little bit more swordplay. Most of what I had gone up against so far were slobbering monsters or creatures who were controlled by others and didn't have much mind of their own. My only real opponent who had any sort of training was the original Summer Knight and the Green Man. I wondered if Vanderhorn had trained him as well. I suppose he must have, but who could really be sure? I had beaten him not by skill, but through trickery. Technically, I had adequately defended myself and was still alive, but a man like Vanderhorn might consider that to be dishonorable. It was only a matter of time before the Green Man came back, or the Winter Court decided to send something at us to challenge the new knight and lady. Skill at arms was always something useful, so I was glad that Queen Titania had decided I was worthy of instruction. I decided to make my way to the greenhouse as well to see what sort of welcome was being given by the lady. I walked in to find her embracing Vanderhorn, as many other Brandylow clapped and cheered. You would have thought a dignitary was returning, and when she saw me, the lady smiled and waved me over. Sam, I'd like you to meet Aurelius Vanderhorn. He's one of the previous Summer Knights. He's probably one of the most well-known and respected Summer Knights, too. He's been asked by Queen Titania to train you in swordplay. It's quite an honor, she said, as though that much should be apparent. Vanderhorn smiled and thumped me on the back. We met on the way in. I've already tested him and found him to be a little raw, but a fine pupil. I wonder, my lady, when would be the best time for us to conduct training? I do not want to overtax him, and I do not want to take him away from his usual duties. The lady seemed to contemplate, finally nodding as she said, First thing in the morning, and just before sunset would probably be best. I like to keep my knight on guard against intruders during the daytime, and it's always nice to have his power to draw upon when I have particular projects that need completing. I suppose any time he has downtime, you could always squeeze in a little bit of training as well. Sam, what do you think? I think your assessment is very wise, my lady, and I would be more than happy to work with Mr. Vanderhorn any time he's available. That's the spirit, Vanderhorn said with a wink. What's more, Queen Titania has told me to be at your disposal and until I feel that your knight is properly trained. Do you have some place at the botanical garden where I might reside? Sleeping in ditches and under trees isn't really good for these old bones anymore. Of course, I'm sure we can find you somewhere to bed down. I'm glad to have you here again, Aurelius. I must catch up. It seems like ages since I've seen you. With that, Mr. Vanderhorn took his leave to go get himself set up in one of the little greenhouse rooms, where some of the Brandylow had begun resting in the afternoon. I turned back to find the lady looking at him as if she were a starstruck girl, and I found myself getting excited about my first training session with the old man. "Do you know what this means?" the lady asked after Vanderhorn had stepped outside. "Queen Titania wants a well-trained knight?" The lady reached forward and grabbed my hands, her closeness making my heart race a little. "It means that we're back in Queen Titania's favor. I've been worried that she was angry with me. What we did was sort of a trick. We killed her knight to take his mantle, and then I accepted her position as summer lady so that she wouldn't put you down to have it returned. I had denied her for centuries, and I was worried that she would be upset at me for suddenly deciding it was the proper time to take up the position. Then, she had been quiet for so many months, not a word or a request or even the offering of training, but now she has sent her trainer to us so that you can receive a proper education. It means we're finally back in her good graces, and it means I can finally relax a little bit." As she spoke, I noticed that the lady looked relieved in a way that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was as if a weight had been lifted off of her, and perhaps it was the support of Summer that made her feel like this. The way she explained it, however, made me suddenly wary of Mr. Vanderhorn. The way she spoke of him made him sound like he and the Queen of Summer were very close. If we weren't in the favor of Summer, perhaps he was here for another reason. We had trusted Queen Titania and her court before, and then discovered treason amongst her people. What if Mr. Vanderhorn were here to see if we were worth the effort, with orders to get the mantles back if we failed his test? "Don't look so glum," the lady said, kissing me on the cheek before releasing my hand. "You'll learn so much from Aurelius, and I know you'll make me proud." I nodded, telling her I would do my best, and making up my mind to keep a close eye on my instructor. It seemed I was going to have a lot to live up to if I meant to be the best summer knight that I could be. With the favor of the court hanging in the balance, I would need to impress the Queen of Summer if our positions were to be made less tenuous. It seemed there was always some sort of upset in the park, and perhaps that was to be expected as the seasons changed once again. "Look, we know you can't do the show without us. We don't like the direction that this is going, and we want out." Julie looked up from her desk as she smiled placidly at the three men standing around her office. They were studies in contrast. Carlos was the one yelling, the bold and often brash face of the trio. Jean was backing him up, spitting facts at her as if she didn't already know. Wallace, however, was standing near the door, as if he might run at any moment. She knew that all three of them were scared. They all had every right to be scared, but she didn't think some of them grasped exactly what was at stake here. They wanted her to stop. They wanted her to pack up a multi-million-dollar franchise and just quit it. Did they know how stupid that was? Did they know what would happen to all of them if Julia just stopped producing the show? Fausti Review was one of the biggest kids shows in the last 10 years, one of the last shows with live-action puppets to survive the internet boom. And even if she wanted to, she couldn't. There was still a part of her that really wanted to set it all down and run as fast as she could, but they wouldn't let her do that. The Muse wouldn't allow her to throw it all away, not when they were so close. "Carlos, you work for one of the largest companies on the East Coast. Your show, a show that you play one of the main characters in, makes enough money to produce shows for years to come. What makes you think we would ever call a halt to it, just because you want us to?" Carlos slammed his hand down on the desk, but it was an impotent move. He had no real power here. None of them had any real power here. Julie didn't have any real power here when you came down to it. The Muse had all the power, and they knew how to exert it. The truth was that the numbers had been a little mixed lately, but the ratings were still up. Way, way up. Kids in the test group said that the new direction was a little scary, but most of them still couldn't look away. They knew that they were being poisoned, but they seemed to like it. They would tune in week after week for new episodes, and this last episode was really going to bring it home. The network loved the idea of a live episode. An episode in front of a live studio audience with fans in the stands watching the show unfold. Sesame Street did it all the time. Other kids' shows did it all the time. But this was really going to drive the ratings wild. Julie said these things when she was at meetings. She used all the buzzwords and all the appropriate jargon, but the ratings really didn't mean much to her anymore. Truth be told, the ratings hadn't meant much for a long time. When she did well, the Muse would praise her, and the headaches and the pain that she felt inside of her would go away for a little while. When she tried to resist, or when she did not do well, whether that was her own flaws or just because the market was fickle, the pain inside her would double, and sometimes the thing that lived beneath her skin would take her and do what it wanted to. Sometimes it would destroy things or hurt people. Sometimes it was even people she knew. A few weeks ago, she had watched as her own hands strangled a homeless man to death. She hadn't worn gloves. She hadn't taken any sort of precautions. And the Muse said that unless she wanted to spend the rest of her short life in prison, she needed to do better. Fortunately, the police didn't really care much about dead homeless people. But next time, it might be someone more important. It might be someone who worked on the show, or an executive that would be someone that the police couldn't ignore. I'm asking you to be reasonable. We've shot every episode, except the last one, and we've practiced it enough times to know what's going on here. Those creatures can't have the show. They're terrifying. They're evil. You can't let them have that kind of access to children. Julie shook her head slowly. Why are you talking to me about it? Wallace writes the scripts. Talk to him. Wallace cringed at the sound of his name, and she could already hear the coming argument. Wallace had been to her office many times in the last month and a half. He told Julie how the scripts always seemed to get changed. He would write one thing, and then there would be a last-minute change made to the script, and it would be in everybody's box the next day. They would ask him why he had written such things, why he had changed the script, but he would always throw his hands up and say it wasn't the script that he had written. Julie could commiserate with him. Sometimes she was the one that changed the script. Sometimes the Muses took it upon themselves. It didn't matter. Once it was in the script, it was gospel, and that was what they were going to do. The scripts lately had been full of added content for these sorts of things. They had killed off the antagonist, something they had wanted to do for quite some time. The music hall now belonged to Gus and his band of performers, but the real antagonists still existed. Somehow the ghost character had begun trying to fight them, trying to get them to leave. Julie knew that this was Gus, or rather Wallace, trying to gain control of the show again. But the Muses wouldn't have it. Wallace had been making changes at the last minute to change it so the Muses couldn't change it back, as if they would really care about the actions of some ghost. The Muses didn't really care what the ghost of the music hall did anymore. It was simply content to work its magic where everyone could see. You know as well as we do that those creatures are messing with everything. They need to go, Julie. They need to go, and we need the show to return to something like normalcy. We need this live event to be the start of something better, not whatever they intend to do. Julie smiled, looking up from her paperwork as she crossed her arms over her chest. And what will you do if I say no? What will you do if I tell you to do your job and stop bothering me with your silly problems? We have other options. We have the Actors Guild and the Puppeteers Consortium. We can go to the higher-ups. We can go to... You can go back to your little FBI man who's been snooping around. Is that what you mean? The look on Carlos's face was priceless, and he didn't even try to hide his surprise at the idea that she had discovered their plot. That's right. I know all about him. He can't stop me, and neither can the higher-ups. None of them can stop me. I will do what I will do, and there's nothing that you can do about it. Unless you want to be on the wrong side of history, I would suggest that you go back to your puppets and do your job. The higher-ups like all of you, and it's the only reason that I haven't fired every single one of you. I can't very well fire Wallace because he is the showrunner and the screenwriter, but I can fire the rest of you if it comes down to it. No matter how much the bosses like you, you're always replaceable. So go tattle to me to your Agent What's-His-Name, but be sure that you're back in time for rehearsals. I want all of this to go off without a hitch, and I want all of you where you're supposed to be when the time comes. Carlos looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he turned, taking Jean and Wallace with him. Julie went back to her work, needing everything to be perfect before showtime at the end of the week. An example needs to be made. They need to learn the price of sedition. As if on cue, someone else knocked, and then in walked George, the conductor for the animal band. He had about 12 musicians under him, the ones that played the music for the animals in the orchestra, and he did not look pleased. He looked as if he had eaten something that did not agree with him, and right now he was contemplating whether to throw up or just let it work its course. Julie, we need to talk. Oh boy, everyone just wants to talk today. What's on your mind, George? The orchestra can't go on like this. They're talking about walking out. The orchestra is playing music on one of the most popular children's television shows on the network today. Why in God's name would they want to walk out? They're scared. Many of them are seeing shadows in the orchestra pit, and they're hearing voices that they can't place. A lot of them are having bad dreams and not sleeping well. They don't want to do this anymore, Julie, and they're saying that they'll quit before any of this drives them crazy. Julie looked up at him, and the way he flinched back made her wonder if her smile was really so terrible. What about you, George? Are you going to walk out? Are you having bad dreams? Are you going crazy? He licked his lips and seemed to think about it. I've seen things too. This place is haunted or something, and I've definitely had bad dreams as well. I can't keep doing this, Julie. Something has to give. And it's not just us anymore. The puppeteers are talking about walking out as well. We're all in the same little pit area, and we've all seen things. We can't go on like this. Julie spent the next half hour assuring him that everything was okay, and that everyone would be all right. She was sure that the muse had helped a little bit, but when George left, he seemed to be in better spirits. He was still fidgety, and he was still scared, but perhaps she had put his mind at ease. What put her mind at ease was the little voice near the back of the room, and what it said when George walked out to talk to the rest of his crew. Don't worry, we'll take care of it. That was the good thing about the muse. He always handled his own dirty work, and he never asked for pay increases or days off. Julie could use about 5 more just like him. She knows about you. She as good as told us that she knows you're investigating them. You need to be very careful, Agent Warwick. Agent Warwick had agreed to meet Carlos in the back of Buffalo Wild Wings, about 10 miles from the studio. They weren't likely to see anyone they knew, and even if they did, the place was loud enough that he doubted anyone would overhear them. Between the giant obnoxious TVs and the constant hooting of the clientele, it was pretty reasonable to assume that they could get a little privacy while enjoying some pretty good wings as well. Agent Warwick always felt a little hesitant about putting meals on his expense account, but when Buffalo Wild Wings was on the table, he always put those worries aside. What does she know? She knows that you're watching, and she knows that you're trying to take her down. Isn't that enough? Son, lots of people try to take me down. I work for the FBI, and when I begin investigating someone, that's kind of their job. Doesn't really bother me the way it used to, but I'll certainly keep an eye peeled. What I really want to know is what's going on Friday. What has she got planned? I don't know. The script changes day in and day out, and I think she's doing it to keep us on our toes. She's got us so anxious that most of them are afraid to question her anymore. I know Wallace hasn't slept in about a week, and he's starting to get ragged. Gene is holding it together, but he's still pretty upset about his puppets, and he's talking about just leaving. I'm not sure what would scare me more about leaving, the Muse or the network. Warwick was pretty sure that he should be more afraid of the Muse than a bunch of stuffed shirts, but he supposed everybody had to make a living the best way they could. For now, I want you to head back and let me know what you find out. I still need you to be my eyes and ears in there if you're willing. I'll keep you posted, but it's getting very dangerous in there. I'm pretty sure that Wallace is about to crack, and I don't know how much longer Gene is going to last. We're all getting ragged, and we're all pretty done in. Warwick could commiserate with the man. He really could. He had asked quite a bit of him, and it wasn't entirely fair. So far, he had him install listening devices in quite a few of the office buildings. He also had him reach out to other people who worked there so he could get a better feel on what had been going on. There were a lot of ways that his request could have ended in these people being dead, but he supposed they all knew the risks when they had started and what it would mean if they didn't succeed. Understood. Let me know everything before Friday, or I'm going to try to get it shut down. I can't have whatever is going on in there spilling out into the real world. It's just too dicey to risk. Carlos said that he would keep him posted, and the two of them parted ways as they went back to their own separate lives. Warwick knew it was about to come to a head. This was the closest he'd ever been to cracking whatever was happening, and he wasn't going to turn away now. He would catch these laughing audience bastards, or he would die trying. Carlos returned to the studio to see some sort of commotion going on. There were a lot of people standing around the soundstage, and they all appeared to be standing near the area where the orchestra sat. Carlos approached, seeing Gene standing near the group and immediately regretting it. It was George, and he was in a bad way. He had hung himself in the orchestra pit. The ligature marks around his neck were ghastly, and people were speculating on how he could have gotten up there on his own. George wasn't a small person. He was quite rotund, actually, and it was hard to believe that he could have made it all the way up there by himself. People were standing around and asking questions, but when someone cleared their throat, everyone turned as if expecting answers to have finally arrived. It was Julie, and she looked as if she would be more than happy to provide all the answers they wanted. Oh my goodness, poor George. I didn't know he was in such a bad way. It's a shame what's happened to him, but We have to continue with the show. George would want it this way. It's what he always talked about. George would want us to finish what we started, and I think we owe it to him to do just that. I'll call the coroner, and I think the rest of us should get back into our positions. We have a show to put on, but it's going to be a very important one. No one seemed to be able to argue with her, so they headed back to their assigned areas as the coroner was called, and others went about trying to prepare the body in a more respectful way. Carlos looked at Julie and realized this was what she had been hoping for. She had been hoping they would fall back into line after an example was made, and they had done just that. Whatever was going to happen on Friday, he had little doubt that it was going to be something that no one particularly wanted, though it may yet be spectacular. John looked up as the woman approached the desk at the hospital. He didn't know her, but he felt like she was familiar somehow. She seemed to know him, and when she said his name, it made him feel like he might be at a disadvantage. I hate to come to you like this, but I need your help. She brushed her hair behind her ear and seemed to think about the best way to go about it. We have a mutual friend, and I'm very worried about him. Do you have a minute to talk to me? It's okay if you don't. I can come back another time, but I feel like we really need to help him. As it happens, John said with a smile, my shift ends in about 45 minutes. Would you like to meet me out in the memorial gardens of the hospital? I'd be glad to speak with you. I just have to finish up some end-of-shift paperwork, and once my relief gets here, I'll come out and meet you. The woman's face brightened almost immediately. Thank you so much. I've been very hesitant to come. I know that Earl would be upset with me if he knew that I was talking to you. When she said his name, that's when John realized where he knew her from. You're Candace, he said, and she seemed to jump a little when he said her name. That's why you seem so familiar. Earl talks about you all the time. I hadn't seen him in a few weeks. Is he doing okay? He's not sick, is he? Candace seemed unsure of how to answer, and finally told him that it might be best if they talked privately, and that Earl was fine for the most part, but she had concerns about something that was going on. John told her he'd be glad to talk with her, and he flew through the rest of his shift as he waited for his relief to come in. James was almost always late, but John couldn't really hold it against him. James was young, and John suspected that this might be one of his first jobs. The kid was trying his best, and the day shift was definitely not what you would call a learning shift. It was hard to keep people at the reception area, though, and John wished him all the luck in the world. James finally came lumbering in about 15 minutes late, and John gave him the rundown before heading off to the memorial garden to meet with the mysterious girl that his new friend talked about so often. He and Earl met quite a few times after their first meeting in the cemetery. Earl had talked to him about seeing the ghosts and speaking with them most of his life, but mostly he had helped John make sense of what he was seeing and what they wanted. John was new to the whole spirit talking thing, and sometimes it could be a little bit confusing. He figured it was something he would grow into eventually, but for now, it was nice to have someone like Earl to bounce ideas off and help him figure it out. Mostly what he talked about was Candace. It was pretty clear that Earl was absolutely smitten with her. John would tell him about Frankie sometimes, but listening to Earl made John wonder how serious things with Frankie really were. The way Earl spoke about Candace made it sound like the two were already married. John liked Frankie quite a lot. He would even go so far as to say he loved her, but it was hard to examine that love when you had someone like Earl sounding so devoted. And now, this woman was here to talk to him about Earl, and John wondered what exactly was going on. She was waiting for him in the memorial garden, a place that John liked to go whenever he had a moment to himself. It was very peaceful there, a spot where you could always catch a moment to yourself or just walk around whenever you were on your lunch break. In the spring, it was often full of butterflies, and John was always a little sad to see it deteriorate in the winter. Spring was just beginning now, and with the early morning chill gone, it was just the two of them standing amongst the flowers that had yet to bloom. "Thank you for seeing me. I don't know who else to come to. Earl has friends, but I'm afraid that if any of them hear the sort of things that he's been going through, they might think he was up to something." "No problem," John said, as he took a seat beside her on the bench. "I haven't seen Earl in a couple of days, not since he said you two were going on your camping trip together. Did something happen to him? Is he okay?" He's fine," Candace said, but John wasn't sure he believed her. "Something happened during the camping trip, but not the sort of thing you're probably thinking about. John met someone in the woods while I was indisposed." She paused before she said the words, as if she wasn't sure of how to phrase it. "And we had to come back early because he wasn't himself." "Not himself? I'm not sure I follow." "The person he met, the person I took care of, did something to him that changed him. He spoke to him, and it hurt Earl somehow. I don't know. I'm probably not explaining this very well. The man was one of the strangers they keep talking about, the ones who are not allowed in town. He showed him something that made him different, and now he hasn't been himself. That's the best way to put it, but I'm worried that whatever the man showed him might have changed him for the worse. I'm wondering if you could come to speak with him. He likes you, he respects you, and I think if you went to talk to him, that it might make a difference." John shrugged. Of course I'll go speak with him. Earl is my friend, and I don't want anything bad to happen to him either. Lead the way. We'll see what we can do." She seemed relieved when he had agreed. He didn't know why, but it felt like she had expected him to say no, or to say that he wouldn't help. If Earl had spoken so highly of him, then that was strange, but John thought that maybe it was just stress getting to her. Earl could be a little strange all on his own, and maybe she was just used to people not wanting to help him. Either way, he piled into his car and followed her to the graveyard, where he could see Earl was already hard at work. He was bent over a grave plot as he went about his daily chores, and John thought he looked as normal as he ever did. He parked beside her in the little lot outside the cemetery, and as they got out, she turned and told him not to be alarmed by what he might see. "He needs our help, and I really want to try to do right by him. I feel like it's my fault that he's like this in the first place, and I want him back the way he was before he went in the woods." John patted her shoulder in what he hoped was a friendly way and not something that could be misconstrued. "We'll do our best. That's all we can do." With that, they went into the cemetery and found Earl hard at work. John could already tell that something was a little different than it had been. Earl was doing a lot of talking to himself, but it wasn't the sort of conversation he usually had with the ghosts who often bothered him. Earl was mumbling to himself, arguing with himself more than anything, and John wondered if he might have gone a little bit crazy. He had felt like that sometimes when he encountered strange or sometimes scary apparitions, and he knew Earl had been doing this a lot longer than he had. If Earl had finally stepped off the deep end, maybe seen something out in the woods that had pushed him over, then John didn't know how much help he was going to be. He wondered for a moment if it might be beneficial to take him down to the forgetfulness clinic and get Dr. Winters to remove whatever was causing him such problems, but when Earl turned around and smiled at them, John wondered if even Dr. Winters could fix what was going on inside his friend's head. "John, Cassie, what a surprise. What brings all of you out here?" He was smiling as he said it, but then he turned his head and began to talk to nothing. Not really talking, more arguing than anything. It was like watching someone have a fight with themselves. Not friends, not friends. Only brat, only brat. Hush, hush. They are friends. John is here to see you, Candace said. We're worried about you. We think something might be wrong, Earl. Wrong? What could be wrong with me? I'm right as rain, just the same as I've ever been. She knows. She doesn't know anything. Just hush your mouth. John wet his lips, not entirely sure what to make of any of this. It didn't look good. Whatever it was, he didn't like to see his friend this way. It made him feel a little sick. It made him wonder what was going on in Earl's head. Haven't seen you in a couple of days, buddy. Have you been okay? I knew you said you were going camping, and I just wanted to make sure you were all right. John hadn't noticed it when he first walked up, but Earl's mouth seemed to be trying to smile, but it wasn't capable of making it all the way. It came out as more like a grimace, a persistent tic that seemed to be trying to take over his facial features. It looked a little like what you'd see on a stroke victim's face, and John hoped he hadn't suffered some kind of seizure out there or something. Me? Oh, I'm right as rain. Never been better. No. Earl began grumbling as he went back to yanking weeds from the plot in front of him. John was worried, but he realized that there were other people he could consult. He mouthed for Candace to stay here and keep talking to him, and John moved off into the cemetery to consult a couple of spirits that he had met through Earl. They were everywhere. There were a lot of ghosts in the graveyard, but Earl had a few that he spoke to every day. They were his friends, and he liked to make sure that they were taken care of. John closed his eyes and focused a little bit of will, and when he reopened them, he could see the spirits were lingering around the place. He looked for some of the more lively ones, the hardware store owner and the old antique dealer, even the older woman who often called Earl by her grandson's name. But most of them were keeping their distance from the frantic gravedigger and seemed to be trying to go unnoticed. The spirit that had lingered around the grave plot that Earl was working on was looking down from his own headstone as if Earl might be a mouse that he had noticed scurrying under a table. John walked close to the old antique dealer and whispered to him, "What's going on with Earl?" "We don't know," the man responded, "but something is happening inside his head. Look," he said as he pointed at Earl. John looked, and with his sight on, he could see something spilling out of Earl's ears. It looked like the light that you saw coming out of an attic window, and it stuck out a good 12 inches on either side of his head. It looked like there was a concert going on between Earl's ears, but something about that light made John grimace. He didn't like it. He didn't like what it was doing to his friend. "He's getting worse. The last few days he's still been himself. He's just distracted and a little flighty. He'll look at me sometimes, and it's like someone else is looking out of his eyes. I don't know what to do, John. I don't know how to help him. I don't know how to reach him." John wanted to comfort her, but he couldn't bring himself to lie to the woman. Whatever was going on had him worried, too. Whatever was going on with his friend was not good at all. John was worried that it might only be the beginning. I winced as one of those big trucks passed us on the highway. They never seemed to be going slower than about 1,000,000 miles an hour, and even though Grandpa's truck is sturdy enough to take the wind, it always feels like it's going to spin us out. If Grandpa noticed, he didn't comment on it, and just kept right on looking out the window. "Maniac," I said under my breath, as I pointed us towards Gainesville. Grandpa had an appointment with a specialist today, somebody that his regular doctor had suggested. Grandpa did not look too enthusiastic about the appointment, but he was willing to go nonetheless. He'd been coughing a lot more lately, the sound of his too wet cough resounding through the cab of the truck. tried not to notice the red spots that usually appeared on Grandpa's handkerchief when he picked it up to catch the cough. And if he thought he was being subtle by switching to a red handkerchief, then he was wrong. He seemed to be short of breath lately, too, foregoing his usual walks in favor of sitting by the fire or trying to take it easy. That's how I really knew that Grandpa was starting to feel whatever was going on with him. Grandpa had always been active, at least as long as I'd known him. But this was the first time that he had gotten out of the house in nearly 2 weeks. With spring right around the corner, I was beginning to worry that Grandpa's health problems were beginning to catch up with him.
Cut 'em some slack, kiddo. They have places to be and things to deliver. Most of those guys are probably on a deadline that would make you think twice before ever sitting behind the wheel.
Well, that doesn't mean they have to thunder along like lunatics. Grandpa turned to look at me, and the set of his eyebrows was absolutely withering.
When a man sitting behind a desk tells you you aren't getting paid unless you drive 18 hours in 12 hours, you cut some corners. Usually it's sleep or driving at a safe speed. At least it was while I was doing it.
Oh, yeah? I guess you were one of those guys who thunders along doing 90 in a 75-mile-an-hour zone, weren't you?
Damn straight. If I wanted the bonus that came along with getting there ahead of schedule, then I damn sure better be ahead of schedule.
I don't think I've ever asked you a lot about the trucking business, I said all of a sudden, wanting some conversation. What's one of the weirdest things you ever transported? An hour and a half of driving ahead of us, so I figured a little story might be just what the doctor ordered to pass the time. I didn't want to overtax Grandpa. I had the heater on, and he still sounded a little wheezy, but I also wanted to keep him talking. Stories were something that he always enjoyed, and despite his health, I still wanted him to enjoy himself.
Let's see. I told you about the furniture that I had to deliver to Anchorage. I told you about the time I had to do a milk run. I told you about the weird house on the cliff. I don't think I ever told you about the lockbox that I had to deliver to Nashville, though, did I?
A lockbox? What, was it some kind of bank heist money? Maybe a cursed walking stick or something?
No, it was far more important than that. It was something we had been asked to deliver personally. Something that absolutely had to be there on time.
Well, you feel up to telling a story? Grandpa coughed into his handkerchief a little more and then let it rest on his lap as if he knew he'd need it again before long.
I guess we don't have anything better to do. If you're so hell-bent on seeing this Sawbones up the road, then I guess there's no better time than the present. It was, 1975, and your mother was just about to go into high school. I'd been doing some on-again, off-again trucking lately, mostly just bill-paying stuff, and when the order came down, I thought it was a little too good to be true. My boss called me on a Friday morning and said that he had something he thought only I could pull off. The client says that it has to be there by Saturday morning. It's going to Nashville, and it's gonna be a 9.5-hour drive at a reasonable speed. I shrugged, but I realized that my boss couldn't see it through the phone. So what's the problem? Anybody could make that run, I told him. They could if I had the package. It isn't even coming in till damn near midnight. I whistled. That was a tight run, especially if they wanted it there by morning. What time does it have to be delivered? I asked him. Client says it has to be at the Nashville show stage by no later than 8:30 in the morning. Do you want me to deliver a package 9.5 hours away in 8.5 hours? Kurt, that can't be done. If anyone can do it, Rusty, then it's you. I've seen you deliver it in less time, and I have every faith in you. Will you do it? Well, I don't know. What's the pay? Kurt, the guy who had taken over for the guy who had hired me, read me a number that made my eyebrows jump up into my hairline. There was no way that the client was actually going to authorize something like that, but Kurt said that he had been given every assurance that the delivery was legitimate. He said that if it was there before 8:30, I'd get the bonus, and if it was there a minute later, then he wouldn't pay me at all. I asked Kurt why he would take on such a crazy job, and his response made me roll my eyes. Rusty, if I'm paying you that much, then how much do you think he's paying me? That was usually the crux of it. Money talked and bullshit walked. If I wanted the money, I would have to do damn near 90 miles the whole way there. The chances of getting pulled over were pretty good, but I had a fuzzbuster in the car, as well as a few other gizmos that I'd picked up. I felt pretty confident in my ability to dodge probing eyes. All I had to do was drive all night at a near suicidal speed. What could go wrong? I thought again about refusing, but then I remembered that your mother only had 4 more years until she'd want to go to college. Your uncle, who had been about a year younger than her, had already poo-pooed the idea of college and told us he wanted to join the Army. I liked the idea. The Army felt a lot like a family business, since neither of them had much magic between them, and I realized it would save me from having to pay tuition for 2 kids. Your mother had these lofty ideas about going to business school or maybe nursing school, and I realized that would be expensive. The amount of money they were talking about paying me for this run would look really nice in her college fund, and I begrudgingly told him that I would take the offer. So I kissed your grandma goodbye and told her I'd be gone a couple of days. She asked where I was heading, and when I told her Nashville, she said to pick her up a souvenir and to drive safe. I told her I would, and got in my regular truck and drove out to the depot so I could get my big rig. It was easier to keep that rig at the depot than to drive it home. You've seen the conditions of the roads. Can you imagine trying to get an 18-wheeler up there? Even in good condition, it would be a nightmare. I took my time, talked to a couple of guys at the depot, went and had a bite, and just kind of hung around as I waited for this delivery to come in so I could get started. I was honestly hoping they might be a little bit early. The idea of making a 9-hour trip in about 8 hours was not something that I really thought I could do, but for the money, I was willing to give it a try. Worst case scenario, I didn't make it on time and still got paid for the drive. The boss was going to have to pay me either way, and the bonus was really just something to shoot for. I hung around, kept an eye on my watch, and when another truck rolled in at about 11 o'clock, I thought I might have a little more wiggle room. When the 2 guys got out of it and looked at me, I wondered if going home might not be a better option. Both of them were white as sheets. The one that had been riding in the passenger seat looked like he'd seen a ghost, and that he might be sick if he stopped to think about it too long. The driver had that 1,000-yard stare that you sometimes see on guys who've come back from the war, and they unloaded the back in a matter of minutes. I had expected something big, some instruments, or maybe something imported, maybe even a bunch of drugs, but it was nothing but an old steamer trunk. It had been locked up with a heavy-looking Yale padlock, and the guys who were hauling it seemed pretty glad to be rid of it when they threw it into the back of my big rig. I signed off on it and thanked them, and then I smartly transferred it to the back of my truck. I could hold this thing in my personal vehicle and probably be quicker than I could if I was driving my big old 18-wheeler. My boss wouldn't know the difference. He'd gone home hours ago, and I set out with my steamer trunk in my back seat and headed for Nashville. I shook my head as I drove, wondering why my boss had insisted on using the big truck. He was the one paying for gas, even though I was going to make him pay for whatever gas I used in my truck. The bill would have been nearly as high as gassing up that big thing. Then I thought about the guys who had delivered it and wondered if there was something about this trunk that they didn't like. Perhaps it was something that hung around it that made them look so nervous. I hadn't bothered to inspect it or give it any real thought, but as I drove, I began to see what all the fuss was about. Maybe it would have been better in the back of the big rig, because from the back seat of my truck I began to hear strange voices and see odd lights. It started out as phantom guitar riff, something smooth that arced out of the cracks in the steamer trunk, like it was trying to escape. I saw strange flashes of light, too, that accompanied the sound, and I began to wonder who exactly was back there playing. The music was good, something I had seen before maybe, but as the first song ended, I nearly drove off the road as a gunshot cracked out, and I turned my head to find the trunk dark and quiet yet again. I got back on the road, realizing I didn't have time to be sidetracked by whatever was going on there, but that didn't seem to stop the action. A few minutes later, I heard a similar sound. This time it sounded a little darker, a little deeper, and I realized that this was not the blues that I had heard the first time, but something a little heavier. It played on for a little while, an hour at least, and then there was the sound of an engine and screaming tires and somebody shouting. Then the music cut off, and I was left trying to get my heart to stop galloping. After that, I put my foot down, and I didn't stop until I needed gas about 5 hours later. The whole ride took me about 8 hours, and there were parts I was pretty sure I was doing 120. The chest just kept playing music, some of it rock, some of it jazz, some of it heavy metal, some of it gospel, but it always seemed to end the same way. People would scream, I'd hear gunshots, I'd hear people fighting over something, and then it would all end before it started again. I tried my best to ignore it, and I wished to high heaven I'd had a set of earphones or some earplugs so that I could block out what I was hearing. I'd heard some pretty god-awful things when it came to spirits, but this was the worst. It was like reliving a terrible movie again and again, and after a while, it began to eat at my psyche. I began to think about how nice it would be to just find a telephone pole and drive my truck into it. I found myself unable to enjoy the music as the coming fall got worse and worse. Worse than that, I began to hear an insidious voice telling me to break the lock and take the guitar. It would tell me how I could be one of the greats, a legend, and all I had to do was take it and fulfill my destiny. Even though I knew how each one ended, I was still tempted to do just that. What did I know about music? I'd never done much more than sing in the church, but something about that voice told me that it didn't matter. Told me that I could be a star, and all I had to do was open the box. That was when I started treating it like something supernatural. Supernatural things, spiritual things, boogie stuff, those were all things I could handle. Having my mind and senses faded from a weird presence was scary, but it wasn't something I couldn't deal with. I let your grandmother's training wash over me, putting a barrier around my mind so that whatever was in that box couldn't get to me. It didn't block it out completely. It was more like sticking cotton in my ears to block out a loud noise, but it tuned it down to a low mumble, and I managed to make it the rest of the way to Nashville without breaking the lock open to seeing what was in that box. I pretty well knew what it was by then. The voices coming out of it had painted a pretty clear picture, but the longer it talked, the less I found that I wanted to see what was inside. I pulled into Nashville about an hour before the deadline. I had practically flown down the road to get there, and it didn't take me long to find the place I was supposed to drop it off. It was an old show stage, the kind of place that had probably seen thousands of musicians and just as many stars. I pulled around back and knocked on the stage door as the box continued to tell me that I needed to open it and accept my reward. It didn't bother me as much as it had, but it was still there, and that told me that the sooner I got rid of this thing, the better. The guy who opened the door was a young kid, maybe 18 or 19, and when I told him that I was here to deliver his package, he told me to wait and went back inside to get someone. I was checking my watch by then, the appointed time getting closer and closer, and when I looked up as the door came open, I couldn't believe who I was seeing. Now, you know your old Gramps doesn't kiss and tell, but the fella here was kind of a big deal. I won't name drop, but he was probably one of the biggest celebrities I had ever met. I went and got the trunk out of my truck and handed it to him, as if the voices bothered him, then he never showed it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key, and then he slipped it into the lock. I saw him reach inside and take out the most beautiful guitar I had ever seen. It was old. The wood looked ancient, but it had been refitted so that it could play electric as well. The man thanked me, handed me a couple of bills for my trouble, and headed back inside. He invited me to come see the show tonight, but I knew I had a long drive to get back home, and I was eager to get on the way. The drive back took a little longer, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like it took no time at all without that guitar yelling at me the whole way back home.
So what happened to the musician you gave the guitar to? Grandpa frowned as he shook his head.
He played a show that was supposed to be second to none. The people who were there said it was the greatest show of his life, but it was the start of his slow decline. 6 months later, somebody shot him in a motel room, and I never found out what happened to the guitar after that. I assume they took it. That seems to be the way of it, and maybe that person saw his own star rise. It didn't have anything to do with me. I was just the delivery man, and I got a pretty good bonus for getting it there ahead of schedule. Helped me get your mother into college a few years later, and she was mighty glad for it.
Grandpa coughed into his handkerchief, and it sounded terrible as we rounded the corner and saw our exit coming up. I was worried about Gramps and that lingering cough, but It was always good to hear one of his stories. Who knew how many more stories I had ahead of me, and how many more I'd have the pleasure of enjoying. I'm sorry, Agent Warwick, but Director Hires is dealing with something at the moment and is out of office. Have you tried his cell phone? Warwick had called his cell phone first, and growled at the poor woman before he could stop himself. I understand. Can I leave a message? Of course. Go ahead, Agent. Tell him I need to speak with him as soon as possible about a matter concerning my current assignment. Time is of the essence. Please make sure he knows that. Of course, sir. I'll tell him when I see him. I suggest you keep trying his cell phone. Warwick said he would, and then promptly hung up on her. His phone buzzed again as the news talked about this Jarrett's Dirge business. Warwick supposed it was some viral marketing for his last album, but it sounded like it might have gone awry. There were rumors that it was killing people, and he knew what was actually going on. Warwick didn't have time for rumors and news. He had things to do. He rubbed out his cigarette and headed inside. He had been speaking with Carlos for the last few days, and they were running out of time to get this pulled. He'd tried to get the actors to strike, tried to get Carlos to talk to the others so he could get them to sabotage the production. But Carlos had been different after their meeting over wings. He was scared. They were all scared. And he had told Warwick that he couldn't meet with him after their last. Things have changed. It's not just my life anymore. I can't risk anyone else for the sake of the case. With no help coming from that front, Warwick had decided to go to the network. If they wouldn't pull the plug, he'd go to the power company. When they heard that their cash cow was about to be tainted, they would have to put a stop to it. The waiting room was the usual gaudy affair. They had hung their accolades everywhere, and a sea of eyes looked down at him from the posters of hit TV shows. Warwick had watched many of them. They were shows he had grown up with, and they made him a little nostalgic for a time when things had been easier, less hectic. The place was an altar to their accomplishments, and it was meant to put people at ease, though it mostly made Warwick think of better times. The woman behind the desk smiled at him as he approached, but Warwick was already reaching for his credentials. May I help you, sir? Agent Warwick, FBI. I need to speak with your head of programming. It's very important. The woman looked flushed at the sight of the badge and asked him to have a seat as she made some calls. Warwick opted to lean against her reception desk as she frantically called a few people, and her eyes kept slipping back to him as she was transferred again and again. She was getting flustered, but seemed intent on finding him someone of importance. For his part, Warwick just stood there and looked imposing. He could do that when he needed to. His phone kept buzzing in his pocket, and Warwick was sure that it had something to do with this Jarrett thing. The TVs in the lobby were talking about it now too, and Warwick saw that the death toll was climbing. Internet speculation was one thing, but this was Fox News. If it was on the networks, there had to be something to it. The receptionist finally found someone willing to speak with Warwick, and seemed relieved to be rid of him. Go to the 7th floor. He's waiting for you in the 3rd office on the right. Good luck, she added as he walked past her, making for the elevators. The ride was smooth, and when the doors opened, Warwick found a young woman in a pantsuit waiting for him. You must be the FBI agent my boss is freaking out about. Come with me, he's waiting. She led him to a glass and metal monstrosity with a glass door that read Marcus Sage, Production and Scheduling. Not exactly what Warwick had been looking for, but it would have to do. The young woman pushed inside like she'd done it 1,000 times, and Warwick saw a very sweaty, very harried-looking man behind the desk in a charcoal gray suit. He was typing something furiously, his little mustache twitching with every keystroke, and he finished quickly as Warwick came to loom over his desk. Yes, sir, how can I help you? I hope it's something easy, because I'm absolutely swamped today. Devilishly easy, actually. I need the Towesey review event for Friday canceled. The man had likely been expecting him to ask any number of things, but that was clearly not it. He looked back from the screen, his face conveying all the surprise and incomprehension that Warwick had expected to see. Cancel the show? The guy must think he was crazy. Do you have any idea what you're asking? Towesey Review is a multi-million-dollar undertaking. There's so much already at play here that it would be impossible to cancel. Why would you want such a thing in the first place? Because we believe that airing it would put a lot of people in danger. The man lifted an eyebrow. How so? Warwick hid his grin. He had him on the hook. Now he just had to reel him in. We believe that someone is going to use the broadcast to put out a message that your network wouldn't agree with. It's something that could be very dangerous to both this country and many others. It's dangerous, and we need to cancel this broadcast and get your show back under control. The man seemed to chew this over, and he did not like what he tasted. I can assure you, Agent Warwick, that the script projections are very sound. There is nothing that is going to air that will hurt or endanger anyone. I don't know where you get your information from, but it's incorrect. Warwick racked his brain as he tried to think of something to tell this man. And then he remembered the stuff that he'd been seeing in his peripherals all day. This may be connected to the Jared incident. The man's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. What? Are you certain? I don't see how. The incident is only just, we believe it's a similar intention. Look, I can assure you that my information is sound. We need to pull the premiere, or at least postpone it until we can be sure. This is very important. It could cost the company a lot of money if you aren't absolutely sure about it. The man chewed it over some more, but Warwick could already tell that he wasn't going for it. The potential loss was just too great, and he knew that the network would have his head if he even thought about canceling something this big. It had been a waste of time. He knew that, but Warwick had needed to take the chance. He needed to be sure that it couldn't be done with words before he shut it down with force. I can assure you, Agent Warwick, we will look into this incident thoroughly. Rest assured, if we feel that the public is in danger, we will not air our Towesey Review special. Now, if that's all, I really need to get back to work. Warwick smiled at him, but on the inside, he was seething. The man would do nothing, and Warwick would have to do this on his own. He drove back to the dingy little motel that he was staying at, and when the phone rang, he almost let it go to voicemail. Then he saw it was Director Hires, and he caught it on the fourth ring. Sir, I need some favors. I've cracked this case wide open, and Warwick, it's the show, sir. They're coming through the show, and they mean to target children. We can't let them go live Friday. It would be catastrophic. Warwick, he tried again. Sir, I know how this sounds, but I need more time. Warwick, Hires said, getting a little louder. But Agent Warwick rolled over him. This is huge, sir. The crew of Towesey Review is planning something. Their live event on Friday is going to be a huge problem, and I believe the gallery is going to try to attack people by using the show itself. I need to shut it down immediately. I've tried going through practical channels, but they're bucking me. They won't shut down the show, and they won't listen to reason. I need clearance to pull the plug on this. I need Warwick, his supervisor yelled, and it finally rattled Warwick enough to shut him up. We don't have time. There's a serious event unfolding, and we need all hands on deck. We had a series of suicides reported after a viral video, and we need people to determine how it's occurring. This is your department, Warwick, and we need you here to consult. Pack your bags and get back to Washington ASAP. Over 100 people have already died, and I need your input yesterday. Warwick looked at his phone as though he couldn't believe it. Hires had always had his back, but he'd never asked for his input on a matter. Warwick was the spooky ghost that lived in the basement and was only trotted out when he needed to be involved in something dire. He worked mostly autonomously, never really answering to anyone but director hires, and he wasn't used to being called home like this. Sir, I can't just leave this case like this. I'm at a critical point. Fuck whatever you have going on, Warwick. I need you working on Jarrett's dirge case yesterday. This video is killing people somehow, and you need to help us. God, this is why I fund your department, Maxwell. This is why I justify your salary when the number crunchers talk about cutting the budget. I have stuck my neck out for you more times than any other agent. Now get your ass back here and prove me right. Warwick bit his lip. The director was right, but Warwick couldn't shake the feeling that these two events were connected. He had been looking into Jarrett's death as well as the death of his ex-fiancée. The video evidence led him to believe that the gallery might be involved in those deaths as well. If this video was killing people, Warwick thought they probably had something to do with it. This felt like a feint, maybe even a misdirect, and Warwick knew he had to maintain. I'm sorry, sir, but I feel this is more important. I also feel that this case may be connected to yours. We need to get that video pulled ASAP, and we need to stop this broadcast as well. I'm not asking, Warwick. If you don't get your ass back to Washington, the next thing you will see is state police. You will return, or I will have you rounded up and disavowed. Do you understand? Warwick hung up on him. Then he stripped the battery, doused the phone, and tossed it in the trash after collecting his things and heading for his rental car. In an hour, the car would be parked across the street from the Avis dealership, and Warwick would be on foot. He had to get as far from the car, the hotel, and anything else he'd been familiar with before they started looking for him. He would stop the gallery, no matter the fallout that came afterward. Angela was just putting the finishing touches on the snacks for today's meeting. Meeting, she thought with a little giggle. She meant book club. She had told her husband that she was starting a book club, and he had kissed her on the forehead and told her that sounded just fine. A book club would be just the thing to get her a little adult interaction. He had become worried that she was inside most of the time. She hadn't been going to her usual bridge club meetings, and she hadn't been doing much community outreach lately. He probably suspected that she was going through menopause or something, and she supposed that or something was right on the money. The deviled eggs looked nice next to the bundt cake and the cheese ball with the Ritz crackers she had just set up. She had also made punch, though not the punch that Brother Thomas had said that she would give to her husband. She hadn't had the nerve to try and give any of it to her husband yet, but she had been slipping a little at a time to her son. He always commented on how good it tasted, and when he asked for more, she always told him that that had been the last of it and that she'd have to get more. She remembered what the delivery kid had told her about it causing madness, and it had made her very hesitant and very cautious. The doorbell rang, and as though summoned by her thoughts, he was there. She had put a stop to calling him the delivery boy in her head. She had met him several more times, and he had told her that his name was Brandon. He had a man with him that she recognized. She had known Tyler Durden for many, many years, and she smiled and shook his hand when he offered it. Tyler has heard the message and has decided to come and join us at today's meeting. Well, that's just lovely. Come on in, Tyler. I have snacks on the table, and there's punch in the kitchen if you'd like some. Tyler thanked her as he went in to get some snacks, and Brandon laughed a little as he patted Angela on the back. Snacks and punch. We really do sound like a church meeting here. She expected it might be just the three of them, but she was in for a surprise. No sooner had she settled on the couch with her refreshments than there was a knock on the door. She got up to find two more people on the front porch. They were both smiling and holding books, though she noticed they weren't the same books. They both told her they were here for book club, and Angela invited them in to get some snacks. Book club was the code word that Brother Thomas had given them if anyone was to ask what they were doing. He said that a religious meeting or an unnamed gathering might draw too much attention, and the town was definitely on high alert. A book club, however, was so mundane that no one would think twice about it. Angela supposed that next time they would really need to decide on a book so that they could all get organized, because Brother Thomas had been absolutely correct. It was hard to walk very far in town these days without seeing a poster warning about the strangers or seeing policemen walking around, as they seemed to be looking for something out of the ordinary. They had deputized a few of the men in town and put them on the borders so that they could keep an eye out for newcomers. The town had apparently decided it didn't want anything to do with the Bright, but that was okay. Angela had little doubt that they could be convinced, and she was good at two things in this world: cooking up a world-class spread for a meeting and convincing people. "It looks like we have 2 new friends for book club," she said as she led the new arrivals into the living room. One of them looked like a farmer, a man in bib overalls and a checked shirt. He had a wide-brimmed hat under one arm, and his boots looked a little muddy, like he had been stomping through a cow pasture in them. Thankfully, he did not leave any mud behind when he came into the house, and Angela was pretty glad of it. The other woman was someone she knew vaguely. She was a librarian, or a librarian assistant, at the Kashmir Public Library. She was a dark-skinned woman in a puffy-looking skirt and a pleated button-down shirt, who seemed to be perpetually pushing her glasses up her nose. She had her hair drawn back in a very severe bun, and she seemed very unused to making eye contact. "My name's Harold Lafferty," the farmer said, "and our friend on the radio told me there was going to be a book club today, and I should probably get my butt over here." The woman looked around as if she wasn't sure if it was her turn yet, and when she spoke, Angela had to lean in to hear her. "My name is Linda Taylor. I was driving home when I heard a voice on the radio. He told me things that I liked the sound of, so I decided to come and see what he was talking about. He told me about the book club on the way to work today. I've never called out from work before," she said, as if her boss might kick in the door and discover her here. "But I was so curious about the Bright that I decided to come and have a look." Brandon put a finger to his mouth and made a shushing sound. "We're not ready to say the names out loud yet. There's a lot of hate in this town, and I don't want the wrong people to hear us. For now, Brother Thomas is just our special friend, and his organization is just that, an organization." Linda looked stricken, as if Brandon had shouted at her, but Angela patted her arm and assured her that everything was okay. She offered the 2 of them snacks, and as they ate, she heard another knock at the door. She was beginning to wonder how many there would be, and as she opened the door, she found another woman on the front porch with a copy of Atlas Shrugged under one arm and a nervous smile plastered across her face. "Oh, hello. Is this the book club?" "It certainly is," Angela told her. "You're right on time. Why not come in and get some snacks? We're just about to get started." Pretty soon, she had 8 people, not including herself, sitting in her living room and eating snacks. Linda and Harold were sitting beside each other on the couch, and there was also Patrick, David, Francine, and Cedric. They had wandered up in 1s and 2s, each of them making sure that this was the book club, and after about 30 minutes had gone by without a new person showing up, Angela decided it was time to bring the meeting to order. "Okay, everyone, we all know why we're here. We're here because we've heard the voices of our special friend on the radio, or the TV, or whatever it is you heard it from, and we've decided that the organization just makes a lot of sense. We've decided that unlike the rest of the town, we might like to have them, so
I suppose that we ought to talk about how to make that happen." Her new friends didn't say much. Most of them just sat around and chewed, but Brandon put down his coffee cup and clapped his hands to get their attention. "Well, I've been getting literature from the people outside of town and bringing it back in with me. I've met with our special friend's emissary, and he believes that with a little help, they might be able to cross the border of Kashmir and finally give the town what it's been waiting for. He says that the more people in support of the organization, the easier it'll be. So aside from coming to talk to many of you, I've been leaving pamphlets and tracts around the town. Nowhere they could be found, or that I could be linked to them, but I've been leaving them in places where they would be noticed. I'm hoping that once people see them, our special friend will be able to reach out to them as well, and they'll come to join us." "What about our children?" Patricia asked, as she wiped her mouth on a napkin. "My daughter hasn't really been interested in any of this, and I'm afraid to bring it up to my husband because I think he might tell the sheriff about it. He's one of the men they've deputized to help watch the borders, and I'm afraid they wouldn't understand. He hasn't heard the voice of our special friend yet. He doesn't understand how it makes us feel when we listen to him. His emissary has expressed interest in getting his information to the children. Children are our future, after all, and he wants to ensure that the organization doesn't die out. That being said, you should be very careful who you talk to about this. Everyone in this room is probably fine, but it's going to be very difficult to talk to new people about the organization and its purpose." They spent a few hours discussing strategies to talk to people or to let people know about the Bright, but there was another member they were unaware of, a member who may or may not have been aware that he was still with them at all. Earl didn't dare come inside, but he hunkered beneath Angela's bushes as he listened to the meeting and tried to make sense of what he was hearing. Ever since he'd had his run-in with the man in the woods, he'd been hearing the voice of the Bright in his head. It had promised that it would take away the ghosts and their incessant needs, and as much as Earl would like to be rid of it, he knew that he would miss it once it was gone. Earl really didn't know what to do or what to say, but he was worried that the Bright might be slowly taking over his consciousness. It scared him, but it also felt right, and his mind was divided on what he should do about it. He left before the meeting ended, leaving once Angela said that they might better be getting off before anyone got suspicious. Earl wasn't sure that he trusted any of the Bright people, but given time, he knew that they might get what they wanted. As for Angela, she decided she might broach the subject with her husband again tonight. Maybe she would give him a little of the juice as well. Her son seemed to like it, so why not share a little with him? Who knew? Maybe he would be a convert as well. "It's strange, Doctor. It feels like there's a TV in my head, and I just can't get rid of the signal." Dr. Winters was making tea as she listened to Virginia Toller talk about her recent headache and her recent visions. The visions were more concerning than the headaches to Winters, and she pursed her lips as the woman laid out what was going on. "It's never anything consistent. Sometimes I'll go a whole week without thinking about it, and then sometimes it's once or twice a day. It's like whatever is going on, I just stop and stare out at nothing. The static comes on, and it's like my channel's been switched. I don't know what to do about it. It's becoming a big problem." Virginia was one of the girls who worked down at the general store, and Winters could imagine that it was something of a problem to be filling someone's order and then suddenly have to stop. Her new husband probably didn't like it much either, and Winter was certain that she would see more than one burnt dinner if she were to look inside the woman's memories. Virginia would probably be surprised to learn that her condition was not unique. Dr. Winters had been seeing 3 to 4 patients a week, sometimes as many as 5, with this strange
ailment of static on the brain. It was something she had begun to equate with the incursion of the bright, but that was just a hunch. Honestly, it was just as much a part of the strange charm that seemed to linger inside Kashmir. You could never really be sure what was going to happen sometimes. If it was to do with the bright and its incursion into the town, then Winter would handle it, but she really hoped the two were unrelated. This had been a real season for the bright and its problems, and between them and the healing of the under-prison, Dr. Winters had had very limited time these days for things like office hours or anything like a home life. "All right, Miss Toller, why don't you sit back and drink this and let me see what I can do about those static memories." Virginia took a sip of tea, and she was just saying how lovely it tasted when Dr. Winters sank her fingers into the woman's scalp. She wormed her digits into the gray matter, looking for the threads that would allow her to pull the static out, and she unfortunately had gotten rather good at it over the past few weeks. She had been correct. There were a few burnt dinners in there, a few shouting customers, a few blaring car horns, and it was obvious that the fugue state brought on by the static was getting worse. Winters kept digging, kept working, and eventually she found what she was looking for. The static seemed to manifest as a wire that ran around the mind of the victim. It was like barbed wire made out of electrical currents. It sent a not altogether unpleasant sizzle through her fingers as she grabbed it, but she winced as it slipped out of her grip and scuttled deeper into the brain. It was a slippery thing, an awful, oily little worm, and she found it again fairly easily. She grabbed a hold, and as she finally got her fingers around it, she began to be bombarded by the static's usual defense. It started out as church music, that sonorous gospel music that you often heard around houses of worship. It started out low, and then it began to grow the longer it held onto the cord. She gritted her teeth and continued to pull. It wasn't going to get out. Not now that she had a hand on it, but it was still fighting her for every step. She could hear that the church music was beginning to rise, and as it did, there was a voice beneath it all. She had never heard the voice before, but she found it so soothing on its own. It was a voice that would have been right at home in the place she had grown up, and she began to wonder just how insidious the bright really was. "Why fight, Pamela? You are of the town, but they don't really know you. You need a place where someone like you can be accepted, can even be celebrated. Why don't you come and join us? We could find a place for someone such as you. You could be celebrated, even worshipped, so long as you pay homage to the power that's really in charge. Why fight it? We are inevitable. We will get what we want. It's only a matter of time. Why not play for the winning?" Dr. Winters ripped it out a little harder than she had to, and the woman sitting on the couch made a sound that was almost orgasmic. She lunged forward, her breasts pushing at the front of her shirt, and when she settled back, Dr. Winters noticed that some of her tea had spilled onto her pants. She drank what was left with shaky hands, and when she shook her head, it was as if she had forgotten why she had come there. Dr. Winters? Did I fall asleep? I seem to have come here for some reason, but I can't remember why." Dr. Winters smiled and took the cup from her as she offered her a napkin to clean up her pants. "That's always the sign of a good round of treatment. Don't worry, I think your problems are over now. Just be sure to come back if you're having any other side effects, and we'll get it sorted out. I'm so glad you came in today, and I hope that whatever is ailing you is gone for good." Virginia thanked her, and Dr. Winters walked her to the lobby as she assured her that everything would be okay now. Dr. Winters did not strictly know if everything was going to be okay, though. In fact, she thought that things were only just going to get worse. Whatever was to come, though, she would sort it out, and they would get everything back to normal, eventually. This could not remain like this for long, and it was only a matter of time before everything was set the way it should be. It wouldn't be normal, but nothing in Kashmir was ever normal. Sheriff Guthrie was sitting in the lobby as the two of them came out. He looked tired, and Winters supposed that he would be. He'd been working the checkpoints lately, and she didn't think he'd had a day off in quite some time. She knew he needed to end this quickly so that the people's trust in him would be renewed, but she did wish that he would take care of himself. He could often be a nuisance, sometimes even a downright bother, but he was a good man, and she generally found that she liked him, most days. "Thanks for doing this, Doc. It's been getting worse and worse lately, and I want them to get the help they need before it gets too bad." "Think nothing of it. It's always my pleasure to help with town matters. Is that all of them? Do you have anyone else?" "No, but, well," he dithered, trying to figure out what to say. "Is something wrong, Sheriff?" "No, it's fine. I'll see you later, Doc." He left, but Winter had only taken a few steps before the bell rang again, and he came right back in. His face was determined, and he seemed intent on telling her something. The look told her she probably wasn't going to enjoy whatever it was he had to say, but he clearly needed to say it. "I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something, or I may never tell anyone. I need to get it off my chest because it's been eating at me lately." Dr. Winters blinked at him, not quite sure what he was talking about, but invited him to the back so they could speak. She brewed some tea, not sure if he wanted something removed or just to talk, and as she sat him down, she sat across from him and put her fingers together as she looked through them. "Do you need me to get rid of a memory?" Just to talk. I just need to talk about something. The election is coming up, and, I feel like I just need to get this off my chest, or else it's going to stick with me forever. I need to clear my head for what I'm doing these days, and I've been dreaming about some things lately. I'm hoping that once I tell you, these dreams will go away." He lay back, looking at the ceiling as he tried to order his thoughts. He looked like hundreds of other people that had sat on that couch from one time or another, and Dr. Winters felt sorry for him. This was always the hardest part, the starting. Once they got started, it all just rolled out as easy as pie. "I know you heard the rumors for years that I killed Sheriff Masterson. For a time, it was all anyone could talk about. Well, I didn't kill him, but I was there when he died, and I do feel responsible for his death." Dr. Winters set her tea down and nodded as he spoke. "I would have assumed that any guilt you had would have gone away once his ghost stopped following you around." Sheriff Guthrie looked at her in disbelief. You saw him?" "Of course. He was there, and then he just stopped following you. I assumed that whatever business he had with you was completed and he'd moved on." Well, he did, but I still feel guilty about it sometimes. Guilty enough that I still have bad dreams about it from time to time. I feel like maybe if I tell you, then I'll feel better, and maybe I won't feel guilty about running for sheriff. It's the guilt that's eating at me. I think if I try to run for his old position, I'll end up spilling my guts at a debate.
I just want to tell it and have it done. That way it can't haunt me anymore." "Well, I'm willing to listen and not judge, so go ahead and tell it." "It started with a call about something going on in the woods. We went to the ranger station, but no one was on duty, so we headed out into the woods to find someone who could help us. Masterson showed me an amulet and told me that he'd be safe because he had protection against the creatures of the forest. I don't know if he actually believed that or not, but it must have worked because nothing tried to attack us. We were fine up until we came to the hole and saw the fires burning around the outside." Dr. Winters looked at him through slitted eyes. "Masterson took you to the hole?" "No, we only got about 100 feet from it before something noticed. Emblem or not, I don't think whatever it was liked us being that close during whatever they were doing. It started chasing us, and we ran for it. Masterson fell, his foot caught in a chuck hole, and he dropped the amulet that was protecting him. This amulet, right here, actually," Guthrie said, as he took the amulet out of his shirt. Winters had seen the amulet before, but she didn't realize it was the one that the mayor had given to Sheriff Masterson. It was designed to keep lesser demons away, and she had nothing to fear from it. It made her feel a little queasy, maybe a little squirmy in the guts, but that was really about it. It could have no more kept her at bay than it could have kept one of her brothers away. He was yelling for me to get his amulet, and it was the only time I've ever seen him scared. I picked it up, but then I thought to myself that only one of us was likely to get out of this situation, and it would definitely be me who had the amulet. I didn't want to die, so I took his amulet and I started running. He was screaming after me to come back, telling me that I'd killed him, and when whatever it was gobbled him up, it was the only thing that stopped him from yelling. I ran all the way back to the cruiser, and then I drove to town, and I told them that he'd been lost in the woods when we were out on a call. I never told them that I had been the one that took the amulet. I never told them that I'd been the one to take it from him. So, in my mind, I as good as killed him. It's a burden I've carried for years, and I gotta admit, I feel a little lighter now that I've told you." Dr. Winters was still mulling this all over as he sat up. She had suspected that Guthrie had had a hand in the sheriff's death, but she couldn't have imagined how directly it had affected him. "Well, I'm glad you told me. Means a lot that you trust me that much. I know you're not human, but the service you do for this town and the help you've given me is worth more than humanity to me. I want to thank you for everything you've done, and I hope you won't hold my secret against me." "Everyone has secrets, Guthrie. This town is made of secrets. But I think you already knew that. I'm here to help people forget their secrets, or at least set them aside until they can properly come to terms with them. I hope that's what I've helped you do today, and I hope that you will confide in me again when you feel the need to." Guthrie assured her that he would, and then he left to get back to whatever town business he still had to get behind him. Dr. Winters liked being the town's confidant, and she was glad that Sheriff Guthrie had finally thought enough of her to tell her the truth. It seemed she was often called to be the town's secret keeper, and it was a job that she was glad to hold. It was the night of the debut, and Julie hoped Frank was watching from wherever he was. After a month of accidents, strange occurrences, script changes, and the death of one puppeteer, they were ready for the live event of Fausti Review. This one was going to be a doozy. They were shooting it in front of a live audience, and it was going to be the most highly anticipated season finale of the season. She knew that Frank hadn't wanted a second season, but if Frank had heard the voices that she had heard, then he would have known they didn't have a choice. The muses must be served, or the consequences could be dire. The show had had plenty of setbacks. They had damaged some of the puppets when they didn't feel the puppeteers were doing all they could do. They had even killed one of the puppeteers, one of the men who had been working with the animal orchestra. He was a lesser puppeteer, not someone who was absolutely needed, but it had really brought it home for the rest of them. They understood the stakes now. They understood what they were up against, and they knew better than to make noises where they could be heard. They also believed in Julie, or at least they knew to fear her. She had the backing of the muses, and that was all she really needed. 10 minutes! 10 minutes till curtain call, somebody yelled, and Julie felt a giddy sense of anticipation grow inside her. Tonight was going to be the start of it all, the beginning of the end. The final episode of the TV show she had worked on so hard that would make a finale to the world at large. "Hey, can I have a minute?" She turned. It was Wallace. It would be him. He'd been trying to make her see sense for weeks, and Julie would have probably fed him to the same force that was running things around here if he hadn't been so damn important. Not only was he the lead puppeteer, but he was also a writer on the show, and though she didn't need them as much as she used to, he was still very important. The head muse had made that very clear. He had to perform. He had to go on. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Wallace must have seen something on her face, because he cringed back a little bit, but his resolve was stronger than his fear. "We just want to make sure this is what you really want. We know something's going on. We know that man's death wasn't an accident. We just want to make sure that this is what Frank would have wanted as well. Is this truly what you think we should be doing with the show?" Julie wasn't sure he was actually talking about the direction or whether he was talking about a second season. They all knew that Frank hated the idea. They certainly brought it up enough times, but most of them were too scared of what was going on here to back out now. The show would go on, whether they wanted it to or not, but some of them were important to the muses, and Julie had to make sure that they didn't get out of the net before the trap was sprung. "Of course I'm sure. This is his life's work. It's very important that it go off without a hitch. You want the show to go on, don't you? I feel like our benefactors would be very upset if they thought you didn't want this to go on." He cringed a little. That was good. He should be afraid of them. They were very scary, but they were also very persuasive. "Oh, okay, Julie, if you're sure." "Very sure. You get into place. The show's gonna start soon." Wallace scuttled off like the whipped dog that he was, and Julie grinned as they started to count it down. Tonight was going to really be something. Agent Warwick was hiding behind the soundstage and watching as the audience piled in. He could hear the music going on inside, hear the excited voices of the kids as they went to see their favorite show, but none of them seemed to realize what was at stake here. He suspected this was going to be the night when they made their move, and it was going to be of the utmost importance that he shut it down. It was the last chance for Warwick, and he did not intend to waste it. He had been hiding for the past 3 days, posing as a homeless man so he didn't attract too much attention. He had seen the police officers in the area, and he suspected they were looking for him. He couldn't afford to be found by the state police right now. His work was of the utmost importance, and as little as he wanted to harm anyone, he would if it came down to it. Right now, they were being let in, but in about 30 minutes the show would begin. He could hear the animal band in there as they warmed up, the kids talking about how cool it would be to see them,
and the adults talking quietly to them as they tried to keep them under control. Warwick hated that they were going to be disappointed tonight, but better disappointed than dead. He supposed Agent Hires would be disappointed as well. The Jarrett case wasn't going well for them, but he had expected as much. No one understood what was going on, and that included Agent Warwick. This wasn't the usual way the gallery did business. They were warping people's minds, yes, but usually it was through the laughter, not through the strange kind of memory osmosis. It was driving people to suicide, and even if he had been there, Warwick wasn't sure that he could have found a way to stop it. It was a lose-lose situation, and he intended to mitigate damage in a place that he could actually be of help. He returned to his alley and found the uniform that he had put in a dry cleaner bag to keep it clean. He hoped the fellow he had taken it from wouldn't get into too much trouble. Security was pretty tight around here, and a few of them had been working doubles lately. It had been a fairly easy operation to pick his trunk lock and take the extra uniform out. He knew the man he had taken it from might not even notice. He might have just thought that he took it out and hadn't returned it yet. Whatever the case, he was glad to have it. He would need a disguise to get in if he intended to go unnoticed. Warwick didn't know exactly what he was going to do once he got in there, but he would have to shut this thing down somehow. Whether it was by cutting the power or just shooting the cameras, he would have to figure it out pretty quickly, or everyone was going to suffer for it. Carlos didn't really know what to do at this point. The show had to go on. It was the only way for any of them to stay alive, but he strongly suspected that tonight was going to be the end of not just the show, but a good number of other things. Carlos didn't really want to go out like this, but his options were pretty limited as he saw them. If he walked out, Julie would probably just get the shadow creatures to puppeteer him in the same way he did his puppets. If he went on, he would be complicit in whatever was going to happen, and he just really wasn't sure he wanted that either. Either way, his puppets were going to be used for something he did not agree with, and he didn't like it any more than anyone else on the show did. "There's still time to run," Jean said, as he noticed Carlos looking at the door. "Who knows, one of us might even make it." Carlos shook his head as he patted Jean on the arm. "No, I won't abandon you guys now. If we're going down, then we're all going down together." Wallace didn't say anything. Both men were getting a little concerned about him. He hadn't been saying much lately, and they thought he might be having a mental breakdown. They could both commiserate. Both of them felt like they might be going crazy too. All three of them had been in showbiz for a long time, most of his life in Carlos's case, but this was one of the strangest productions he had ever been a part of. Carlos suspected it might be the last production he was ever a part of, but he tried not to think about that. One of them would need to get out of here so they could tell everyone what had happened. He kept hoping that Warwick would barge in with the feds and shut this whole thing down, but as the animal band began to play and the crowd began to clap, the chances of it happening seemed less and less with each passing moment. They were walking out now, carrying their puppets and smiling at the kids, and the parents who were seated in the stands as well. It wasn't their fault. None of them had any idea what was going on behind the scenes. Carlos hoped it wasn't going to be the end for all of them either, but who really knew anymore? "Good evening, everyone." He flinched as he saw Julie walking onto the stage with a microphone in hand. Julie, the harbinger of death herself, had arrived, and she was carrying one of the muses with her. "I'm so glad you could join us tonight. Welcome to the live performance of Fausty Review. I hope all of you are ready for an evening of laughs, because today's performance is going to be one to remember. I won't spoil anything by prattling on, but I do want to thank the crew for all their hard work, as well as everyone who's worked on the show. You guys deserve everything that you've worked for, and I do hope that you find it under those stage lights tonight. Now, Without further ado, let's begin the show.